Jon stood on the ramparts of Winterfell in the pale light of dawn, gazing over the courtyard below. The chill of the northern wind nipped at his cheeks, but he scarcely noticed it. Winter had drawn to a close, or so the maesters believed. The long night was over, and in its wake lay a land battered, broken, yet stirring with a fragile sense of hope. All was not well in Westeros, but the great threat had at last been vanquished. The Night King and his horde of the undead were gone, and the living had prevailed, albeit at a steep cost. He thought of the men and women who had fallen in that last battle. Many from the north, stout, loyal, hardy folk who had trusted him to lead them into the darkest hours of the realm's history. Many from the Vale, from the Reach, from the Iron Islands, and even from the Crownlands. Armies that had once warred against each other had stood shoulder to shoulder on the battlements of Winterfell to face that ghastly tide of death. And in their unity they had found a way. Victory had been paid for in blood, in unthinkable sacrifice, yet somehow they had emerged from that night. The snow had since begun to melt from the ramparts, forming rivulets of ice-cold water that trickled down the stone, a soft and steady drip that echoed in Jon's ears like distant footsteps. Although he had fought for the living, he had never expected to stand at the center of this aftermath. Indeed, many had fought and many had commanded. Daenerys Targaryen had led her dragons into battle, and so had he, riding regal by her side. Yet the realm was changing, and with the White Walkers defeated, the political tides of Westeros had shifted in a way that none, not even the wisest lords, had foreseen. The houses still mourned their dead, yet they looked also to the future. And they looked, it seemed to him. He did not quite understand it at first. Jon had been raised to think of himself as a bastard of House Stark, a boy who had no claim to anything beyond duty. Then he had learned of his true parentage, and that secret had lain heavily upon him, a burden of identity. It had once threatened to tear him apart, divide his loyalties. But in the end, he had done his duty. He fought for the realm. He had believed in Daenerys, in her right to the throne, but she too was gone now, perished after an assassin's arrow found its mark in the chaos of the final battles. That was yet another wound upon his heart. She had believed she was fated to break the wheel, only to depart this world before she could witness any lasting peace. In the silence that followed, with no dragons left but one, Drogon flying away into the unknown, and so many of the lords and ladies of the realm lost to war, there was a sudden vacuum. At first, Jon had remained at Winterfell simply to pick up the pieces. Sansa had taken a leading role in the North's recovery, ensuring food was distributed, helping orphans find shelter, and settling disputes among the lords. Arya had taken to traveling again, sometimes returning to share tidings of trouble or tales of heroic deeds scattered across the battered realm. Bran dwelt mostly in his own world, entangled in visions, a quiet, distant presence who nonetheless gave wise counsel when pressed. In those early days, Jon planned to help rebuild the North, then quietly fade away. He had had his fill of bloodshed, of leadership, of a destiny he had never truly wanted. Yet the letters had started arriving, one after another, from Riverrun, from the Eyrie, from Storm's End, from Sunspear, and from the remnants of King's Landing. Messages sealed with wax, bearing sigils of houses great and small, the direwolf, the Moonan Falcon, the Kraken, the Stag, the Rose, the Sunan Spear, the Trout, the Flayed Man, the Twin Towers. Some were written on parchment so fine it seemed translucent, others on thick, coarser paper, scrawled in shaky hands of lords or ladies who had survived the cataclysmic wars. And all bore the same request: come south, Jon Snow, and unite this kingdom. All the great houses, in a rare moment of harmony, had called for him. The North would stand with him, they said, and the Vale would abide by his word. The Reach, battered by war, needed a strong voice to guide it. Dorne, typically distant, acknowledged his role in the long night. House Greyjoy, half destroyed, needed a unifying presence to quell unrest on the seas. The Riverlands, as ever, served as the battered spine of the realm, and its lords and ladies wrote that only he could grant them peace. Jon stood confounded by it. He remembered kneeling before Daenerys, proclaiming her queen, surrendering the crown of the North because he believed in a future free of division. She had believed in him, too. She had even bestowed upon him the name Aegon Targaryen. But with her gone, and with so many turning their eyes to him for leadership, how could he refuse? It was never his dream to be king, but the realm itself pleaded. Winterfell was quiet at dawn, save for the occasional shuffle of guards patrolling the walls. Jon closed his eyes, letting the wind rustle his hair. He could still smell the faint odor of burnt flesh from the funeral pyres that had been lit on the battlefield months past. It haunted him, but in that haunting came a stealing of resolve. People were counting on him. They believed in him not because of his name, though many had discovered the truth of his bloodline, but because of his deeds, because he was the one who had inspired men and women from all corners to fight together. He was the one who had never broken faith, who had died and returned to save them. If, after so much death, they needed him to be king, he would answer. The day he announced his acceptance to Sansa was a subdued affair. He found her in the Great Hall, conferring with a group of bannermen. The Great Hall of Winterfell bore new scars. The beams overhead had cracks where the cold had tightened them. The floor was littered with scuff marks from the countless feet that had trampled across it in the days of preparing for war, and the tall windows still carried soot from the torches that had burned through the endless night. But all of that gave the hall a sense of lived history, of survival, just like the North itself. Sansa saw the resolve in his face and dismissed her bannermen with a nod. As they departed, she turned to him, her red hair catching the light from the hearth. Her expression was poised, careful, yet touched with a quiet sadness, as if she anticipated what he might say. "You've decided," she said. Jon's voice felt heavy in his throat. "They need a king in the south. If the North alone called me, I could refuse and remain here, content to be warden. But it's not just the North this time, Sansa. Every letter, they all say the same thing. The realm cannot unite unless I lead it." Her gaze flickered downward for a moment, and he saw the mixture of pride and sorrow in her eyes. "Then I suppose you must heed them," she replied. "Though I always hoped we could rebuild the North together, without any more burdens on your shoulders." He went to her and took her hand. "I'll need you still," he said softly. "The North is strong under your guidance. They trust you. I'll need a hand, or an advisor in truth. Someone I know will speak their mind openly. We've seen what happens when kings listen to flatterers, and I won't let that happen." She inhaled. "If that's your wish, I'll do whatever I can. But the seat of a king might be best held from King's Landing, as the realm's traditions would dictate. Or perhaps you'd choose another seat. You're not a typical king." Jon nodded, thinking of the charred ruins of King's Landing. He had seen them only briefly after the final battles. The city had been partially sacked, partially burned by dragonfire, partially ravaged by all the armies that had marched through. But rebuilding efforts had already begun. "We'll see what can be done," he said at last. "I don't want to rule from ashes. The realm deserves a new beginning, even if we must build it from rubble." Word spread faster than Jon could have imagined. By raven, by messenger, it carried on the tongues of travelers. Jon Snow, the one-time bastard of Winterfell, the king in the north, who had played a decisive role in saving the realm from the White Walkers, would accept the crown for all Westeros. And that name, that moniker, Jon Snow, stuck in the minds of the small folk and the nobility alike. The lords might whisper about his Targaryen bloodline, but the common folk remembered how he had bled on the battlefield. They remembered that he had marched south on their behalf. They remembered, too, that he had, by all accounts, come back from the dead. Some spoke of him in hushed awe, calling him the White Wolf, or the Dragon Wolf, or the Risen King. He had no appetite for such grand tales, yet they spread all the same. As he prepared for the journey south, a quiet excitement and dread warred within him. He walked the ramparts one last time, visited the crypts where lay the remains of his father, Ned Stark, the father who raised him, though not by blood. He remembered Ned's voice, urging him to be honorable, to do right. He carried that memory with him as he mounted his horse and led a modest procession out of the gates of Winterfell. They were not a grand host, only a few knights and advisors, plus Sansa, Arya, and Bran, and a few trusted allies. Ser Davos Seaworth, the loyal man who had served as Hand of the King once before, Tyrion Lannister, who, surprisingly, had survived the wars and chosen to remain by Jon's side out of respect and regret, and Brienne of Tarth, who insisted that her sword would ensure that any new king might rule in justice. The journey south was long and arduous. Spring was just beginning to thaw the roads. The snows gave way to muddy tracks which slowed their horses. Everywhere they passed, people came to see them. In small villages, men doffed their caps and women curtsied or waved, their eyes filled with gratitude or hope. They whispered, "Long live King Jon," or "Bless you, your grace," though to Jon those words felt foreign. He was just a man who had fought for them. He had never sought glory or power, yet it weighed on him now heavier than any cloak. When they reached Moat Cailin, banners flew from the crumbling towers. The fortress that guarded the neck was mostly deserted, but a small garrison loyal to House Stark stood watch. They hailed Jon as he passed through, calling him king, and he found himself nodding in acknowledgement, though his inner awkwardness never quite vanished. From there, they traveled the King's Road, past deserted farmland where crops had been raised by one warring army or another, past weeping willows that lined the roadsides with limp branches newly sprouting green buds. They camped in the open, sometimes sheltering in the homes of minor lords or in half-ruined inns. In each place, they found evidence of the war's ravages, but also glimpses of resilience. Children ran barefoot in the warming mud, old men told stories of the battles they had survived, and mothers carried newborns who would never know the darkness of the long night. "Your Grace," Tyrion said one evening as they huddled around a campfire, "I do believe you're more liked by the people than you realize. They might not fully know who or what you are, but to them you're the man who helped save their families from the undead. That is a powerful story. It binds them to you in a way no crown or name alone could." Jon looked at him across the fire, which danced shadows on Tyrion's face. "I'm not sure I deserve it," he murmured. "All of us fought." Tyrion lifted his shoulders in a subtle shrug. "Deserving doesn't always come into it, Your Grace. History is often shaped by what people believe. They believe you fought for them. That, in and of itself, can do wonders." Ser Davos nodded. "Aye, but we mustn't let that go to our heads. We've seen what a conqueror can do when power blinds them." Jon thought of Daenerys, of the heartbreak of the throne she had tried so hard to claim only to lose everything. He bowed his head in respect, the memory clawing at him. But he found within himself a resolution: he would never allow himself to be consumed by that kind of ambition or rage. For all the realm's sake, he had to be better, or at least try. After many days on the road, they came to the outskirts of King's Landing. The city was still in shambles, but there was progress. The outer gates, once mighty, were peppered with scorch marks from dragon fire. Rubble had been cleared from some streets, and makeshift wooden frameworks were rising where entire blocks had been destroyed. The people watched the newcomers arrive, wide-eyed and uncertain. Jon saw the scars of war on them, burns, bandages, a certain hollow look in the eyes of those who had lived through the worst. He dismounted near the ruins of the dragon pit, remembering how once, under different circumstances, he had brought the white there to convince Queen Cersei of the coming war. The memory seemed like a distant dream now. The Targaryen sigil was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a scattering of various banners. House Greyjoy's Kraken, House Tyrell's Rose, though House Tyrell itself was nearly extinct, the Blackfish of House Tully, the Falcon of the Vale, the Wolf of House Stark, and others. Representatives from each region had apparently arrived for this occasion. Even the Lannister lion was present, though nearly the entire Lannister line had been reduced to little more than a name. At the city gate, he was greeted by a handful of surviving knights, men from the Crownlands who had pledged themselves to the new order. They all bent the knee. Jon glanced around uncomfortably, motioning for them to stand. He did not revel in such displays, but it was clear they considered him their rightful liege. They made their way through the city slowly, allowing the people to see their new king. Some knelt, some simply stared, some called out blessings. A few looked suspicious or weary, as if they feared this was just another change in a line of heartbreaks. They had seen kings and queens before, false messiahs and fallen tyrants. Hope did not come easy to these folk. Jon understood. He could only do his best. They made camp in what remained of the Red Keep. The keep's ramparts had partly collapsed, entire corridors had caved in, and the throne room was a scorched ruin. Nonetheless, a large portion of the structure was intact enough to house guests. Jon's footsteps echoed as he traversed the familiar hall, accompanied by his closest allies. They came upon the throne room at last, and the sight struck him with a hollow ache. The Iron Throne, once a monstrous seat of power made from 1,000 swords, had been melted into a twisted lump of metal, a shapeless mass that still gleamed dully in the shifting light. It was as though some vengeful spirit had put an end to its dominion. In reality, it had been dragon fire that did the job, and the monarchy it had once represented ended with Daenerys' final, tragic flight from that place. Tyrion's voice broke the silence. "Well, that's certainly symbolic," he said, letting out a small, humorless chuckle. "What is a king without his throne?" Jon exhaled. "A king who doesn't need one, I suppose. Maybe it's better this way." "Perhaps," Sansa murmured, stepping to his side. "But we'll need a place to gather. The Great Council is to meet in a fortnight, yes?" Jon nodded. The lords and ladies had promised to convene to make official what they had demanded by letter. They would name him king of the 7 kingdoms, or what remained of them. In that gathering, they would hammer out a new foundation for peace. Or so Jon dearly hoped. In the days that followed, Jon and his companions worked tirelessly. They set about clearing the rubble in the Red Keep's courtyard, erecting temporary structures where the delegates could meet. Craftsmen and carpenters who had survived the wars were put to work, employing their skills to turn ruin into something habitable. Jon traveled through the streets with the city's few remaining gold cloaks, those who had survived and stayed loyal to the city itself, making sure the small folk were fed from what stores the realm still had. He authorized the opening of the Red Keep's granaries to feed the starving. Sansa, Braavos, and Tyrion all worked on forging new lines of trade between the regions so that grain from the Reach and fish from the Vale and the North could replenish King's Landing. Slowly, the city began to hum with an uncertain energy. Ships that had been damaged in the final naval battles were repaired at the ports. People returning to the city found a semblance of order. Still, the wounds were deep. Too many had died, too many lost. The city's population was only a fraction of what it had once been. As the appointed day of the Great Council approached, the highborn lords and ladies of Westeros arrived in a procession of colors and sigils. Some came with knights, others, battered as they were, arrived simply with a handful of guards. One by one, they disembarked from ships or rode through the gates, an entire tapestry of the realm's nobility. Lord Yohn Royce from the Vale, Lady Brienne officially representing House Tarth and the last known interests of House Baratheon by the late King Tommen's lineage, Edmure Tully from Riverrun, Gendry Baratheon from Storm's End. Newly legitimized after the wars, representatives from Dorne with their golden sons pinned to their cloaks, Lady Asha Greyjoy from the Iron Islands, and more. Each house still standing, each represented. Many had come in person, though some sent envoys due to injuries or the simply overwhelming cost of travel in these hard times. They gathered in the courtyard of the Red Keep. Tyrion, hand on his chin, studied the small dais constructed where the Iron Throne had once dominated. Atop the dais, a large oak chair had been placed. Nothing fancy or intimidating, just a seat, newly made, yet reminiscent of ancient northern design. Jon had insisted on something simple. This was to be a moment of solemn unity, not a gaudy celebration. The day dawned bright and cool. The sun shone on the battered stones of King's Landing, lending them a faint golden hue. The lords and ladies arranged themselves in a semicircle around the dais, their gazes fixed on Jon Snow, who stood in simple attire, black leather jerkin, black breeches, boots caked with dust from the city's streets. He wore a wolfskin cloak, as was his wont in the north, but no crown. Sansa stood at his right, looking out at the assembly with an air of calm authority. Bran was beside her, expression distant, eyes watchful. Arya lurked near the back, half hidden by the throng. Ser Davos, Tyrion, Brienne, and a few other loyalists flanked Jon. When Tyrion stepped forward to call the assembly to order, a hush fell. He thanked all present for coming, acknowledging the hardships they had faced to be there. Then he gestured to Jon, who stood before them all. Jon cleared his throat, wishing it did not feel so tight. He looked from face to face and saw weariness, hope, pain, longing. He saw old enmities, but also a shared desire to rebuild. He took a steadying breath. "My lords and ladies," he said, his voice carrying in the still morning air. "We have all bled, lost, and suffered for too long. We have seen what war can do, and we have seen the threat beyond the wall that nearly destroyed us all. We stand here together because, despite everything, we survived. And now we must decide how to live." He paused. Not a soul spoke, as if all had been waiting for him to say these words. "I never sought to be a king," Jon continued. "I was named king in the north once, and I accepted because I knew we had to unite to face the dead. We did, and we prevailed, but only just. In the aftermath of that war, those of you who remain, lords, ladies, the free folk beyond the wall, men and women across the realm, have urged me to take the crown for all the 7 kingdoms. I do not claim it by right of birth. I do not claim it by force of arms. I am here because you have called me." A quiet stirring rippled through the crowd. Jon realized, with a pang, that many of these lords and ladies had pinned their last hopes on him. With a last glance at Sansa, he straightened his shoulders. "I will accept what you offer on one condition: that I rule with your consent, that we shape the laws of this realm together, and that never again do we suffer a tyrant to sit upon this throne. Too many have died at the whims of mad kings and queens, or the ambitions of houses that would tear us apart for a seat of metal. If you give me your loyalty, I vow to do everything in my power to ensure peace and justice. But I will not do it alone. I need wise counsel, and I need the realm's unity. Will you grant me that?" He fell silent, and a hush covered the courtyard. Slowly, the lords and ladies began to kneel. First Lord Royce from the Vale, who bent one knee, head bowed. Then Gendry Baratheon, new to his title but fierce in his conviction. Then Edmure Tully, tears glistening in his eyes as he recalled how much had been lost. Asha Greyjoy nodded and bent the knee as well, her posture reluctant but resolute. The Dornish envoys genuflected, remembering how their people had marched north to stand against the undead. On and on it went until every representative, highborn and common, was on one knee. Sansa took the crown that had been forged for the occasion, made not of swords or dragonfire, but of simple silver hammered into shapes of dire wolves and dragons intertwined. She stepped onto the dais behind Jon. In a soft voice that nonetheless carried, she declared, "In the name of all assembled, I name Jon of House Stark, Snow no longer, Jon Targaryen, the White Wolf, King of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm." Jon knelt to her, allowing her to place the crown upon his head. When he stood, all eyes turned to him. A wave of exhilaration and dread coursed through him in equal measure. With a trembling breath, he raised his voice. "Then let us begin together as it should always have been." A roar of approval arose from the courtyard. Cheers, applause, the sound of horns. The noise echoed off the broken walls, filling every crack with the promise of renewal. Jon let it wash over him and whispered silently, "For the realm." The next weeks passed in a flurry of attempts to shape a new order. Jon appointed a council to govern alongside him. Ser Davos became the master of ships, for none knew more about the seas and the shipping routes so vital to trade. Tyrion, after much hesitation on Jon's part, resumed a role as the king's hand, but only after swearing he would dedicate himself tirelessly to the good of the realm. Sansa took up the title of Mistress of Governance, essentially overseeing the distribution of resources and the forging of alliances, though she divided her time between King's Landing and Winterfell. Brienne accepted the role of Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, an unprecedented appointment for a woman, but one met with near-universal respect given her heroism. Gendry remained in Storm's End, but sent aid in the form of blacksmiths and masons to rebuild King's Landing and the surrounding areas. Samwell Tarly was summoned from Old Town to be Grand Maester if the Conclave would allow it, a matter for debate, but Jon insisted, trusting Sam above all. The Great Council hammered out a wide range of decisions. They agreed that the authority of the throne would be tempered by a permanent council of representatives from each major region, a new tradition ensuring that no king or queen could act unilaterally in matters of war or distribution of taxes. They debated property rights for small folk, the rebuilding of roads, the re-establishment of trade with Essos once the realm was stable. They argued about the boundaries of the north, whether it would remain part of the Seven Kingdoms or seek independence again. Sansa, for her part, was torn. She recognized the North's ancient desire for autonomy, yet she also saw that the realm needed unity more than ever. In the end, a cautious compromise was reached. The North would remain under the crown for a generation, after which the matter would be revisited by the next council. It was not perfect, but it was a step away from endless war. Jon spent his days moving among the people, discussing with them the new taxes, explaining how the resources would be spent on reconstruction. It was an odd thing for a king to walk among the commoners. Yet he believed deeply that if he was to lead them, he must see their struggles firsthand. He saw blackened ruins where entire families had died, children scavenging for scraps of food, men and women missing limbs from the battles. It tore at him, but it also spurred him to work harder. When time allowed, he often sought the Red Keep's highest vantage, looking out across the city and the Blackwater Bay. Ships came and went, bearing goods from across the realm. He found himself sometimes longing for the quiet nights of Castle Black or the simpler times at Winterfell. He would think of Ghost, roaming in the north, or of Regal, the dragon he had once ridden, now gone, lost in the final battles. Those memories haunted him, but also reminded him why he stood here. One night, after another exhausting day of councils and signatures and petty disputes, Jon found himself standing in the throne room, gazing at the twisted metal that remained of the Iron Throne. The moonlight streamed through a collapsed portion of the ceiling, illuminating the melted swords. It looked like a wounded beast, silent in the darkness. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Arya approaching. She wore her usual leathers, her hair cropped. "So this is what it's come to," Arya said quietly, eyes flicking toward the ruined throne. Jon nodded. "A relic of a world we've left behind, I suppose." She walked around the melted throne, her expression guarded. "I never thought I'd see the day my brother would be king of the Seven Kingdoms." He offered a small smile. "Nor did I, if we're being honest. It still doesn't feel real." Arya studied him. You look tired. Jon laughed softly, a short, bitter sound. I am. Tired of war, tired of politics. But every day I see people in the streets who've lost everything, and I can't bring myself to walk away. She nodded. I understand. I won't stay long, though. There's more of the world to see, and I can't remain caged in these walls. But I wanted to see you crowned. To see with my own eyes that you are where you need to be. He reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. Be careful wherever you go. Send word if you need anything. You'll always have a place here, in the north, anywhere I rule. She placed her hand over his, eyes shining with that fierce light he remembered from their childhood. I'll be fine. I've survived worse than the open seas or unknown horizons. They stood like that for a moment, two Starks, bastard and girl, each having walked a path through darkness. Then she slipped away, leaving Jon alone again with the melted throne. He stared at it and wondered if he would ever truly feel worthy. He remembered the words of a wise man once, we don't get to choose who we love. But perhaps the same was true of destiny. Sometimes it chooses you, no matter how you struggle to refuse it. As the reconstruction advanced, so did the realm's complicated web of alliances. Letters poured in from the free cities of Essos seeking new trade routes, from the Summer Isles offering cordial greetings, from the Iron Bank of Braavos politely inquiring about the crown's debts. Jon delegated much of the financial negotiations to Tyrion and Ser Davos, focusing instead on ensuring that each region of Westeros received fair treatment. The feuds did not simply vanish. The Ironborn wanted more autonomy, the Dornish chafed under the notion of a single authority, and in the Westerlands, scattered remnants of Lannister loyalists plotted in secret. Yet for now, the realm found stability. Food grew plentiful, roads were secured by loyal knights, banditry began to wane. Little by little, life returned. One bright afternoon, Jon and Sansa received an invitation from the Reach to attend a spring festival in Highgarden, newly reclaimed from the ashes. House Tyrell was gone, but new stewards had taken the seat to protect it in the name of the crown. Eager to support the realm's cultural revival, they accepted. So they rode out with a modest retinue, welcoming a moment's respite from the suffocating gloom of King's Landing's rubble and politics. Highgarden, though battered, remained beautiful. The rolling green hills, the rose gardens, still standing though neglected, offered a vivid contrast to the broken city they had left behind. The castle's new caretaker was a distant cousin of the Tyrells, Lord Garrett Flowers, legitimized in the aftermath of the war. He had a genial smile and a broad frame, and he welcomed them with open arms. Singers played ballads of the North's triumph over the undead. The feast was lively, filled with fresh produce from the fields around Highgarden. Jon found himself with a cup of arbor gold in hand, Sansa beside him, marveling at how quickly life could burst forth again. The people of the Reach had known devastation, but they had good soil, and the climate was mild. Harvests were already beginning to flourish, and trade with Dorne promised new prosperity. Sansa leaned close to Jon. It's almost as though the war never happened, she said softly, scanning the hall filled with laughter and music. If you ignore the missing faces at every table. Jon nodded, his eyes drifting from the festivity to the absent corners where House Tyrell's banners should have flown. We've all lost. But I suppose a good part of living on is finding joy again, no matter how fragile. Later, as the festival's dancing commenced in a courtyard perfumed by blooming roses, Jon drifted away from the main crowd, longing for a moment's peace. He found a quiet balcony overlooking the Mander, the great river that wound through the Reach. Moonlight shimmered on the water, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet fragrance of spring blossoms. Sansa found him there. She stood by his side, gaze fixed on the silvery river. It's lovely, she murmured. It is, Jon agreed. Reminds me a bit of the old stories old Nan used to tell us of how Westeros once was before all this madness. Sansa turned to him, her expression earnest. We're making it better, Jon. Piece by piece. Every day we rebuild, we're taking a step toward that dream. He offered her a small smile. I hope so. She hesitated, then placed a hand on his forearm. Jon, I'm proud of you. I know you never wanted this. But I've watched you these months in King's Landing, rising before dawn, going to bed long after midnight, meeting with small folk and highborn alike, listening, compromising, trying to do right by everyone. Most kings I've known, well, they cared only for themselves. Jon let out a soft sigh. I'm no king in the traditional sense. That's for sure. She shook her head. Exactly. And that's why it works. I see the way people look at you. They trust you. They believe you'll protect them. That's rare, Jon. It's something special. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded, and together they watched the moonlit waters. In the distance, faint music and laughter drifted from the courtyard where the rest of the festival continued. For a brief moment, there was peace in their hearts. Upon returning to King's Landing, they learned that Asha Greyjoy had arrived unexpectedly. She came with news of unrest in the Iron Islands. Some lords and captains, emboldened by the lifting of the threat from the north, wanted to resume their old ways of raiding. Asha, trying to maintain the fragile unity, had clashed with them, and a minor civil conflict was brewing on the Isles. Jon met with her in the solar that had become his informal audience chamber. She wore her usual sea-weathered leathers, her hair damp with salt spray, and her eyes set in a stormy glare. "Your Grace," she began, though her tone was more exasperated than deferential. "You wanted unity. I've tried to keep the Ironborn in line, but they grow restless. They say we gave up our independence for a war that's already over. They claim that the Iron Isles have always taken what they want by the old way. They're threatening to break away if I don't meet their demands." Jon rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the crown press on him once more. "And what do they demand, exactly?" "They want to resume reaving along the coasts, raiding the Westerlands and parts of the Reach. Some even speak of attacking Lannisport. They say that's how the Ironborn thrive, by taking, not by toiling like mainland farmers." Sansa, standing at Jon's side, narrowed her eyes. "They can't be allowed to return to that. Too many innocents have suffered at the hands of Ironborn raids." Asha's mouth twisted. "I know. But if the realm tries to force them to stop, they'll rebel. The Iron Islands are still recovering, too, and some claim we can't feed ourselves without pillaging. Though that's only partly true. We can fish, trade salt, and iron. But that doesn't satisfy the more stubborn among them." Jon straightened, meeting Asha's stare. "We've fought together in the Great War, and we've begun building something better. I won't have the Ironborn throw it all away. We'll send envoys. And if need be, I'll sail there myself." Asha blinked, surprised. "You, personally? The King of the Seven Kingdoms, heading to the Iron Islands?" He nodded. "Yes. If they question my resolve, I'll speak to them face to face. I'll make it clear that the days of wanton raiding are done. The realm will help the Iron Islands if they'll help themselves. But we won't tolerate slaughtering and stealing. Not anymore." It took some negotiation, and in the end, it was decided that a small fleet composed of ships from the Royal Navy under Ser Davos's command and several of Asha's vessels would sail to Pike. Tyrion worried about the risk to Jon's life, but Jon insisted. The realm's new unity had to be won not just by words, but by presence. The voyage took them across choppy seas, under gray skies. Jon had never been fond of the ocean, but he endured it, standing at the prow of the lead ship Ghost Wind with Davos by his side. Asha captained another ship, the Seabreaker, forging ahead with her banner of the Kraken. They arrived at Pike to a tumultuous welcome. The Ironborn were divided. Some jeered at the sight of a Greenlander king setting foot on their shores, others watched with a wary curiosity, and a few knelt in acknowledgement of Asha's leadership and thus the king's authority. Pike itself was a fortress of damp stone towers rising from the sea, connected by swaying rope bridges. The wind howled between the spires, carrying the tang of salt and seaweed. Jon's meeting with the dissenting captains took place in a cavernous hall deep within the fortress. The walls dripped with salt water, and the floor was slick. Torchlight flickered over the grim faces of men and women used to violence at sea. They eyed Jon with suspicion. Some spat on the ground at his feet. Asha glared at them in warning, but Jon remained calm. "You named me King of the Seven Kingdoms," Jon began. "The Iron Islands are part of that realm. But I understand your ways are not the same as the mainlands. You have your traditions, your pride. I will respect that if you respect the laws that protect the innocent." A burly captain with a braided beard snorted. "We are Ironborn, not fishwives. We do not cower behind walls and beg for scraps." Jon met his gaze evenly. "Nor do you stand alone against the rest of the realm. If you raise your sails to pillage the coast, you'll draw the wrath of every region still healing from war. You'll lose. More importantly, countless innocents will die." Another captain growled, "Better to die Ironborn than to live a coward." Asha spoke up before Jon could respond, her voice echoing through the hall. "The old way is dead. We bent the knee to save our people from the White Walkers, and now we have a chance to rebuild. We can fish, we can trade iron, or we can build ships for the rest of the realm, and we can secure rights in new ports if we bargain well. Or would you rather keep your pride and see the Iron Islands burn when the rest of Westeros unites against us?" A hush fell over the hall. The defiant captains shifted uneasily. They might have been bloodthirsty, but they weren't fools. They had seen the might that destroyed the dead. They had marched alongside the North, the Dothraki, the Unsullied, and the Dragons. Even if those armies were diminished, the realm was still united under this new king. Jon stepped forward, letting them see the scar on his cheek, the weariness in his eyes. "We have all lost too much. I will not allow more destruction. If you wish to live as free Ironborn, you can, but not by raiding. Turn your talents to fishing and trade, and I'll make sure the realm does right by you. But if you defy the crown and slaughter innocents, you will face justice." The captain's glares slowly lowered. There was grumbling, some stomping of feet, but the seeds of doubt in their rebellious cause had been sown. Jon extended a hand, palm up. "Choose peace. We've had enough of war." At length, one of the older captains with streaks of white in his beard sighed heavily. "I lost 3 sons to that damned war. Maybe the boy's right." He eyed Asha. "If Our Lady says we can survive without reaving, I'll follow her lead. But if you betray us, King, if you starve us out or neglect us, we'll remember." Jon inclined his head. "And if I fail you, I'll expect nothing less." By the end of their stay, the rebellious talk had simmered down. A wary truce was struck, with promises of fair trade routes and fishing rights in the northern seas. Jon left Pike with salt in his boots but a sense of accomplishment in his heart. It was a small victory, but every victory mattered in this fragile new era. Returning once more to King's Landing, they found that word of the Ironborn settlement had spread swiftly. Lords from the Westerlands, anxious about future raids, expressed cautious relief. The small folk, hearing that their new king had personally ventured to the Iron Islands to quell unrest, seemed even more inclined to trust his leadership. The city's reconstruction continued apace. New houses rose in the slums that had been destroyed, the port was bustling with trade, and the Red Keep's courtyard was nearly cleared of rubble. One evening, Jon sat at his desk, reading reports by candlelight. His eyelids felt heavy. The swirl of letters, logistics, and concerns about a possible revolt in the Stormlands threatened to bury him. He rubbed his temple, wishing for the simpler challenges of the wall. Battling undead and surviving the cold seemed a gentler fate than the labyrinth of politics. A knock came at his door. It was Tyrion, holding a stack of parchment under one arm. "Your Grace," he said, with a small bow that was half serious, half in jest. "I have the latest updates from the Master of Coin." Jon sighed. "Come in, then." Tyrion entered, setting the parchments on the desk. He surveyed Jon, noticing the lines of fatigue etched into his face. "You look like you could use some wine." Jon gave a tired nod. "A little, perhaps." Tyrion poured 2 cups from a half-finished flagon on a side table. He offered one to Jon and kept the other for himself. He sipped thoughtfully. "It's odd, isn't it?" Jon raised a brow. "What is?" Tyrion gestured around the chamber. "This. Everything. You, the king. Me, the hand. One might think it madness given all we've been through, the wars, the betrayal, the heartbreak. Yet here we stand, trying to piece together a realm that was shattered." Jon glanced down, swirling the wine in his cup. "It was never about power for me. I think you know that." Tyrion's lips curved into a small smile. "I do. And that's precisely what makes you different. I've served a mad king, a cruel boy king, and a queen who had so much fire in her heart she could scarcely contain it. But you, I won't flatter you and say you're perfect. You make mistakes, you trust too easily sometimes, you brood a bit too much. But you care about these people, truly care about them. And that is why, in all this madness, you might be exactly who Westeros needs right now." Jon exhaled. "I hope you're right, Tyrion. Truly." Tyrion clinked his cup to Jon's in a silent toast. "We shall find out together, Your Grace." The months stretched on, and though it was no fairy tale, the realm did move toward a fragile but growing peace. Dorne resumed its trade in spices and wines, the Riverlands patched its farmland with the help of seeds and livestock brought from the Reach, and the north thrived as the snows receded, finding new prosperity in shipping timber and pelts south. The crown slowly paid off old debts to the Iron Bank, largely thanks to Tyrion's negotiations and Ser Davos's efforts to stimulate trade by sea. The small folk found more reason to trust a king who would walk among them without a swarm of guards, who would speak plainly of their concerns, who would judge petty disputes with fairness and patience. In time, fresh concerns arose. The Stormlands needed repairs to their forts, the Vale demanded new roads, House Tarly and Hornhill had unresolved disputes with roaming bandits. Yet in each case, Jon and his council worked toward resolution with honesty and compromise rather than immediate force. That was not to say the king's justice was never invoked. Jon knew too well that some men would only sow chaos unless made to answer for it. But bloodshed was no longer the first resort. Many whispered that the new king had a distinct presence, neither purely Targaryen nor purely Stark. He had the North's sense of honor and plain-spoken duty, but also something of the Targaryen mystique and aura of destiny, perhaps fostered by his once-rumored resurrection and the role he played in battling the undead. Whatever it was, it commanded respect from even the most jaded lords. As the realm settled into this new chapter, the memories of the Great War and the devastating battles that preceded it began to merge into the annals of history. Songs were sung of the White Wolf King, ballads that mixed truth with legend, telling of how he rose from the dead to save the living from the icy grasp of the Night King. The minstrels who traveled from keep to keep wove the tale of a humble bastard who united the squabbling houses through bravery and compassion, culminating in his coronation upon the melted swords that once symbolized conquest. Jon sometimes heard these songs, drifting through an open window or echoing in a tavern as he passed by, and he felt a sense of disconnection. The songs glorified him in a way that made him uneasy. They never mentioned the countless who died, the horrors seen, the heartbreak endured. Yet he knew stories had power. If these songs could help bind the realm together, if they could inspire hope, then perhaps it was not so bad. In the end, what truly mattered was whether the living could thrive now that the dead were vanquished. And in that regard, things were looking better each season. Crops prospered, trade increased, bandit lords who tried to carve out their own petty fiefdoms were swiftly confronted by the realm's combined forces. Unity might not last forever, but while it did, Westeros was healing. One bright day, Jon visited the Orphan's Quarter in King's Landing, an area set aside for children who had lost their families in the wars. Sansa had organized it with the help of local septas and charitable guilds, turning a row of abandoned buildings into a makeshift orphanage. The children gathered when they saw him arrive, some excited, some shy, some with haunted eyes. He knelt to speak with them, asking how they were faring, whether they had enough food, enough clothes. They told him of their lessons, how they were learning reading and sums, how some dreamed of becoming knights, others seamstresses, blacksmiths, or sailors. A small girl tugged on Jon's cloak. She had wide brown eyes and matted hair. "Is it true you fought an ice demon?" she whispered. "A big one with blue eyes?" Jon hesitated, remembering the terror of that night. "Yes," he said quietly. "We all fought the White Walkers. Brave men and women from every corner of the realm." She clutched his hand. "Will they come back?" He looked at her solemnly. "Not for a very long time, if ever. But if they do, we'll be ready. We'll protect you." She seemed satisfied, releasing his hand and running off to join the other children. Jon stood slowly, feeling the press of memory, the weight of all that had transpired to bring him here. Yet in that moment, seeing the children safe, he felt a spark of gratitude. For all the pain, all the loss, there was life here. New life, forging on. That evening, he returned to the Red Keep and climbed the steps to the crumbled battlements where the highest lookout offered a view of the city. King's Landing sprawled beneath him, lights twinkling in windows and streets, the bay reflecting the moon's gentle glow. He heard footsteps and turned to see Bran approaching, walking slowly, leaning on his staff. "Hello, Bran," Jon said, softening his voice. Bran's gaze was distant, yet also present. "Jon," he greeted. "I wanted to see how you are." Jon laughed without humor. "Tired. But it's a good kind of tired, I think." Bran looked out over the city. "Westeros is mending. The threads of time, the lines of kings, it's all weaving into something new. You've changed the tapestry, Jon. And for the better." Jon studied Bran, who had changed so much since their childhood. He seemed beyond mortal cares, yet still protective of those he once called family. "You had a hand in that too, you know," Jon said. "Your counsel, your visions." Bran shook his head faintly. "I only helped you see. The choices were always yours." Together, they stood in silence for a while, the city below breathing with renewed life. Jon thought of those choices, leaving the Night's Watch to warn the realm, journeying south to bend the knee to Daenerys, forging the alliance to fight the dead, telling the truth of his parentage when the time came, accepting the crown despite every instinct that told him to turn away. Each choice had led him here to a vantage point over a realm that was no longer at war, that was finding a way forward. Eventually, Bran turned to leave, offering Jon a final nod of quiet understanding. Jon remained, gazing at the horizon where the sea met the sky, the waters glistening like silver under the moon. The wind stirred his cloak, and he imagined for a moment he could hear ghosts' distant howl or the roar of dragons that once soared overhead. He allowed himself a faint smile. This was not the end of every story, there would be challenges still. Rivalries to quell, old wounds that might reopen, new threats that might emerge. But for the first time in his life, Jon Snow, once a bastard, once the king in the north, now crowned as a reluctant monarch, felt a cautious hope. He had not wanted power, and yet he had it, granted by the will of those who believed in him. He had not sought glory, yet songs were sung. Perhaps that was how it should be, he thought. Let those who do not wish to rule be the ones who end up doing so, for they will not cling to the throne as if it were a personal prize. Let them treat it as a burden and a duty for the good of all. Perhaps it was not a grand romantic notion, but it felt right. And so Jon stood there, looking out over the city he now governed, at the realm he hoped to guide toward peace and prosperity. He could feel the ghosts of the past whispering around him, his mother and father, unknown to him for so long, Eddard Stark, who had taught him honor, Robb, who had once been king in the north, Daenerys, who had believed in a dream of a better world, the brothers of the Night's Watch who had stood with him at the wall, the free folk who had trusted him to lead them south to safety. So many fallen. But they lived on in what he did now, in every brick laid to rebuild the city, in every child who grew up unafraid, in every field that yielded a harvest instead of burning. It would never be perfect. It would never be a world without sorrow or strife. But it could be better, one day, one law, one gesture of kindness at a time. As the new king, named by all the great houses, crowned not by swords but by the people's will, Jon Snow or Targaryen or Stark, whichever name he claimed, intended to ensure it. He let the night air fill his lungs, and for a moment he closed his eyes, remembering the cold clarity of the north, the stark truths that had shaped him. He remembered the feel of ice beneath his boots, the shimmer of sunlight on newly fallen snow, the hush of a winter dawn when the wind died and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. He carried that memory within him, reminding him that any calm, any peace, could be shattered in an instant if one did not remain vigilant. But for now there was calm, and a chance for the realm to breathe. He whispered under his breath the old words, the vow once sworn when he took the black. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. He had pledged that oath once, and though his station had changed, the meaning had not. He was still the shield, in his own way, watching over them now from a throne he neither coveted nor despised, but accepted with solemn resolve. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new arguments in the council, new pleas from the lords or the small folk. Tomorrow he would continue the work of weaving Westeros back into a single tapestry, one thread at a time, so that future generations would know more peace than war. Tomorrow, the city would greet him with the same cautious hope he felt in his heart. But tonight, beneath the moon and the stars, he let himself be still, content for a moment to be the king they had chosen. Jon Snow, the White Wolf, who had proven that sometimes a man can rise above station and prophecy to become exactly what the realm needs, no more, no less. He stood there a little longer, the battered red keep at his back, the city of kings landing sprawling below, the horizon stretching beyond to the seas and mountains of a continent still healing. And he was, in that moment, both alone and never alone, at peace in the knowledge that for all the tragedies and triumphs of his past, his future and the future of the realm was unwritten, waiting to be shaped by hands that sought not conquest but renewal. With the hush of the night around him, Jon Snow bowed his head in silent prayer, offering thanks to the old gods and the new for the chance to serve, to protect, and to hold the realm in gentle stewardship until it could stand strong on its own. And in the distance, carried by the wind across the moonlit rooftops, there came the faint sound of a distant lullaby sung in the streets below by a mother soothing her babe, or perhaps by a traveling bard weaving a new story of a once bastard who became a king. The tune rose softly, melding with the hush of the breeze, and Jon let it flow through him, a quiet testament to the living hearts he had sworn to safeguard. So he remained, resolved and steadfast, until the moon was high and the city's lights had dimmed, standing as a watchman over a land that might just find its way to peace at last under his weary but unwavering guard. Jon rose the next morning with the lingering hush of night still clinging to the sky, a pale strip of dawn casting faint light across the red keep's ramparts. The city below lay in a half-shadow, the first hints of waking fires flickering in windows and hearths, the glow of lanterns along the wharves reflected in the waters of Blackwater Bay. He washed and dressed with minimal ceremony, as he always did. It still felt strange to have servants attend him, to have every piece of clothing brushed free of dust before he pulled it on. He remembered his days at Castle Black, where he'd have to half-freeze just to keep his leathers in decent shape. But that life was behind him now, even if its lessons remained lodged in his bones. He strapped Longclaw to his hip, the sword that once belonged to Gior Mormont, and then stepped from his chambers into the corridor beyond. A pair of guards straightened at his presence, but he nodded for them to remain at ease. He had no need of pomp. These men, some from the north, some from the Crownlands, had chosen to serve. He walked alone, quietly, through the halls that had once known the tread of Targaryens, Baratheons, and Lannisters. Rubble had been cleared from most corridors, though occasional scorch marks remained on the stone, reminders of dragonfire and the final calamities that had once filled these passages with blood and terror. Outside, the courtyard was already stirring with activity. Masons chipped away at large stones, stacking and fitting them to repair broken walls. Carpenters measured timber for scaffolding. Crates of supplies from the Reach or the Vale were stacked near the keep's entrance, awaiting distribution. Jon paused to watch it all, the sweat and determination of people rebuilding a city that had been devastated too many times. Through this labor, King's Landing was slowly reclaiming a piece of its old vitality. He saw men and women sharing jokes, sharing bread, wiping their brows in the morning chill and pressing on. That small display gave him a flicker of hope. Ser Davos emerged from around a corner wearing a simple gray doublet that bore no sigil. The older man's beard twitched in a tired smile when he saw Jon. "Good morning, Your Grace." Jon inclined his head. "Morning, Ser Davos. Are we still set to review the city's granaries?" "Aye," Davos said. "Tyrion wants to join us too, though the Master of Coin may insist we look at something else along the way. You know how he is. One problem begets another, and soon we're juggling half a dozen tasks at once." Jon let out a breath. He'd grown accustomed to that rhythm. "Let's see to it. We can't afford to let the city slip back into starvation." They began their walk toward the main gate, picking their way past a half-dismantled wooden scaffold and zigzagging through clusters of workers. Many paused to bow or curtsy or simply to nod in acknowledgement. Jon smiled back, keeping his responses subdued. He'd learned that a quiet smile did more to set people at ease than any formal words could. And truly, he had no desire to go about proclaiming his station. The crown upon his head was weight enough. As they passed under the portcullis, they found Tyrion Lannister already waiting near a small row of wagons. He was reviewing a parchment with an irritated crease between his brows. The moment he spotted Jon and Davos, he waved the parchment in the air as if brandishing a weapon. "Your Grace, Ser Davos," Tyrion greeted, with a crisp bow that carried a whisper of irony. "We have a situation." Jon exchanged a look with Davos. "What kind of situation?" Tyrion grimaced. "Apparently, the roads east toward Rosby are being threatened by a new band of outlaws. They're preying on supply wagons, taking food and valuables, and in some cases wounding or killing those who resist. The city needs those supplies to continue rebuilding. I realize it's a never-ending list of troubles, but this one's pressing." Jon's chest tightened with familiar frustration. "We'll address it. But first, the granaries. We can't put that off. We need to confirm we have enough for the winter, or the next winter, or whenever it decides to come again." "Very well," Tyrion said. "We'll start with the granaries, then talk about how to handle these outlaws." The three of them, with a handful of guards, made their way through the streets. King's Landing under reconstruction still felt like a half-tamed beast. Entire avenues ended in debris or scaffolding. Some wards bustled with new taverns or shops, while others lay in eerie silence, marked by charred ruins that had yet to be cleared. The stench of sewage was strong in some quarters, but had diminished in others where new drainage canals were being dug. The people recognized Jon, some from rumor, some from glimpses at earlier appearances, and gave him a mixture of cautious smiles and deep bows. A few called out blessings, praising him for keeping the wolves at bay, an odd phrase that implied their gratitude. Others simply stared with hollow expressions as if they had witnessed too many kings come and go to truly believe in another. They arrived at the first set of granaries by the river gate. Tall stone warehouses stored barrels of grain shipped from the Reach and the Riverlands. Laborers hauled sacks in and out. Tyrion conferred with the overseer, a heavy-set man with a sweaty brow, about how much had arrived that week and how it was being allocated. Meanwhile, Jon and Davos stepped inside one of the warehouses, greeted by a thick smell of flour and dust. Rats scurried between the towering stacks of sacks, and the floors were strewn with stray grains. Guards had been placed at intervals, though they appeared weary. Jon examined one of the sacks, testing the grain between his fingers. He recalled how in the Night's Watch, rationing had been a matter of life and death, especially during the hardest winters. Too little food and men starved. Too much indulgence, and they ran out well before the thaw. Davos crouched beside a half-open barrel. "It looks to be a good supply. The question is whether it'll hold the city through any unforeseen crises." Jon let the grains slip through his fingers. The city's still not at its full population. If more refugees return, we'll need to ensure we can feed them. Last year's harvest was decent, but next year might be uncertain. The war and the long night ravaged farmland. We should encourage more farmland reclamation and store as much surplus as possible. We'll present those suggestions at the next council meeting, Braavos said, nodding. Might be wise to send more men to help the Riverlands farmers who are still rebuilding. That'll pay off in time. Jon stood, dusting off his hands. Let's do that. The more stable the farmland, the more stable the city. They emerged to find Tyrion, still haggling over figures with the overseer. At last, Tyrion strode over, looking exasperated. We have enough grain for several months, given the city's current population. The man claims shipments from the Reach may be delayed due to a dispute between lesser lords. I'll send ravens and try to smooth it over. If the outlaws near Rosby continue their attacks, that'll add another obstacle. Jon took a steadying breath. Then let's address that now. We'll gather a small contingent, track these bandits, and dispatch them. The roads must be safe if we're to rebuild. Agreed, Tyrion said, rubbing his temple. But if you go riding off personally every time a band of outlaws appears, we'll never see you again. I won't go personally. Not unless it's necessary. Jon cast a glance at Braavos. Perhaps we can send a capable commander. Maybe Tormund Giantbane if he's still in the city. Braavos smiled. Tormund's around. He and some of the free folk have been helping with farmland in the Crownlands, though I suspect they're more at home on the open plains or in the mountains. Jon sighed, recalling Tormund's gruff laughter, his wild red beard. He's a good fighter, and he knows how to handle a band of unruly men. Let's speak with him about leading a force to Rosby, get those roads cleared of outlaws. They walked on through the city, making notes of collapsed hovels that needed demolition or aqueducts that needed patching. Jon occasionally stopped to speak with small folk who approached him shyly, asking for justice in minor disputes or simply offering their thanks. One old woman pressed a ragged piece of embroidery into his hand, a depiction of a wolf's head. Her voice trembled as she said, "For the king who fought for us, my grandson was saved by your men when the dead came." Jon tried to refuse the gift, but she insisted. He held the embroidery with care, feeling an ache in his chest. These were the people who paid the price for every war. These were the people he was sworn to protect now. By midday, the sun beat down over the city, warming the stones enough that sweat beaded on their brows. Dust rose in small clouds from the construction sites. Vendors had set up stalls selling bread, fish stew, or fruit from the Reach. Jon realized he was hungry, one of those quiet, persistent hungers that set in after hours of walking and checking on problems. He paused at a stall where a middle-aged woman sold roasted apples drizzled with honey. When she realized who stood before her, she bowed deeply, nearly dropping her tray. "Your Grace, please take it." "No charge," she said, holding out an apple wrapped in a cloth. Jon shook his head and placed a coin in her hand. "Your time and goods are worth something. Let this realm be one where we pay fairly for what we need." She stared at the coin, tears shining in her eyes. "Bless you, my king." He took the apple, offered a small nod, and walked on with Braavos and Tyrion. Behind him, he heard the woman calling out to passers-by, her voice bright with renewed confidence. The coins in her hand would likely allow her to buy more supplies, keep her business going a little longer. They reached the Dragon Gate toward late afternoon. Beyond the gate sprawled a camp of travelers and refugees, some waiting for entry to the city, others resting before continuing their journeys. A cluster of small tents made of patchwork cloth lined the roadside. Children ran among them, chasing each other, while tired men huddled around small fires, exchanging news of the realm. Jon paused. "Let's see what they need. If they're refugees, maybe we can guide them to the new quarter near Flea Bottom, or out to farmland if they want to work." Tyrion eyed the crowd. "We can try. These days, many are just passing through. But some might remain if they can't find anywhere else to go. They'll need food and lodging." The three parted from their guards, save for a couple who tagged along discreetly, and walked through the makeshift camp. People recognized them, or at least recognized Jon's dark cloak, Davos's serious expression, Tyrion's distinctive face. A murmur arose, a ripple of curiosity and awe. Some bowed, some stared. Jon moved from cluster to cluster, asking if they had enough water, if they needed medical attention, if they'd lost family. Children gaped at him with wide eyes, while a few bold youngsters tugged at his cloak, pointing at Longclaw's pommel, a white wolf's head. Jon let them look, though he cautioned them not to touch the blade. A traveling merchant from the Stormlands approached, telling tales of how a portion of the Stormlands still suffered from roving brigands. Jon made a note to pass that along to the council. A fisherman from the Vale mentioned a rumor of a large sea beast devouring nets off the coast. A likely exaggeration, but still worth investigating. Through it all, Jon listened. He recalled how he had once been just another man in the Night's Watch, gleaning what news he could from new recruits and traders. Now, that knowledge would help shape the realm's response to adversity. They left the camp as evening settled, returning to the Red Keep for the day's final round of council tasks. Servants lit torches and lanterns in the courtyard, revealing the deepening gloom of the city's half-rebuilt silhouette. Construction workers trudged away to their modest homes or camps, shoulders slumped from fatigue. Jon felt that same weariness claw at him, yet he pressed on, climbing the steps toward the council chambers. Sansa was there, waiting alongside Asha Greyjoy, who had returned to King's Landing once more. Sansa wore a gown of soft gray, embroidered with silver thread in patterns reminiscent of weirwood leaves. Her hair was braided back, practical but elegant. Asha leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, her dark leathers and salt-stained boots a stark contrast to the more polished attire around her. She acknowledged Jon's arrival with a nod. "Busy day, I gather," Sansa said quietly, scanning his face. Jon exhaled. "Every day is a busy day, but we have a few pressing matters to discuss before nightfall." Asha stepped forward. "I've come with word from the Iron Islands, Your Grace. The rebellious captains who threatened to revert to Reaving have quieted down, for now, but they grumble about needing more fish, more iron, more trade. They're not as hostile, but they're not content either. We'll have to maintain that delicate peace," Jon said. "Any word on those who might openly defy you?" Asha pursed her lips. "A few stirrings. A captain named Gerold Harlaw, known for his cunning, has been sowing rumors that the Iron Throne cares little for the Isles. I can handle him, but it'll be easier if the realm keeps its promises about trade agreements. If we give the Ironborn reason to believe they can make coin honestly, most of them will choose that over war, most anyway." Jon nodded. "We'll expedite the trade talks. Have Tyrion and Davos coordinate shipping routes between Lannisport, Old Town, and the Iron Islands. We'll keep your people busy building and crewing ships, transporting goods. That should encourage a stable livelihood." Asha smirked. "That's the idea. Just remember, the Ironborn respect strength. If they sense weakness, they'll test it." Tyrion, listening in, made a small gesture of surrender. "We'll be sure to show them our steel if necessary. But for now, coin and trade will have to do." At that, they entered the small council chamber, a portion of the Red Keep that had been partially refurbished. The table was smooth oak, the chairs mismatched but functional. Brienne of Tarth was already there, waiting in her capacity as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, though she often weighed in with counsel. Bran sat quietly, lost in his own thoughts, occasionally blinking as if he saw more than just the chamber. He often attended these gatherings to offer perspective beyond the immediate. A handful of other lords and advisors also filled the seats. Jon took his chair at the head of the table, Sansa on one side, Tyrion on the other. A hush settled. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the sky had turned an inky blue, with the first stars appearing. Tyrion cleared his throat to begin. "Shall we start with the matter of the outlaws near Rosby?" Jon nodded, and Davos spoke. "We have a plan to dispatch Tormund Giantsbane and a small force to deal with them. If they'll surrender peacefully, good. If not, we'll remove them by force. The roads must be safe for trade." Sansa took notes on a scrap of parchment. "Agreed. We cannot allow these outlaws to disrupt supplies, or we risk further instability in the city. Will Tormund have enough men?" "We'll assign him a mix of free folk and Crownland's troops," Davos said. "He'll do well." They addressed other issues. The continuing reconstruction in the Westerlands, especially around Lannisport, which had taken damage during the wars. The slow but steady progress of forging alliances with what remained of Essos' trade routes, particularly Pentos, Lys, and Volantis, which were eager to do business in a peaceful Westeros. Tyrion mentioned that the Iron Bank of Braavos was satisfied with the realm's gradual repayment of debts, though they always pressed for more. Brienne then briefed them on security matters. We've had a few minor scuffles in the city between old Lannister loyalists and new Crown forces. Nothing dire, but we must keep an eye on them. Some still resent the Targaryen claims and by extension your Grace's bloodline. They may be few but determined. Jon nodded. We'll not persecute them for holding onto old loyalties, but we won't tolerate sabotage or violence. Keep them under watch. Asha reported on the Iron Islands situation in more detail. Bran spoke in cryptic terms about changes in the North's fortunes, mentioning how the climate might shift now that the others were gone, how certain pockets of land near the wall might become fertile again. Sansa confirmed that Winterfell was doing well, though she planned another trip north soon to ensure her presence among the northern lords. Once or twice, Jon caught her eye and saw the flicker of longing there. Winterfell was still her true home, just as, in many ways, it was his. But as king, he had to remain mostly in King's Landing. They would make do with traveling back and forth as needed. The meeting ran late, the candles burning low, the logs in the hearth crumbling to embers. At last, Jon dismissed everyone. Tyrion lingered for a moment to sift through some final parchments, then yawned and departed. Only Jon and Sansa remained, the chamber empty save for the crackle of the dying fire. Sansa stood, stretching her stiff shoulders. You should rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. Jon rubbed his face, weary. We never seem to finish in time for a proper night's sleep. She offered a small smile. Perhaps that's the price of peace, paying attention to every small detail so we never slide back into chaos. Jon nodded, a heavy acceptance in his eyes. You're right. At least we have a realm worth the trouble. Sansa crossed to him, placed a hand on his shoulder gently. We do. Now sleep, brother. The city will still be standing in the morning. He gave her hand a light squeeze, then watched her depart. Once alone, he lingered a moment, letting the silence settle. The flicker of the fire lulled him with memories of Winterfell's great hearth. When he finally stood and left, the halls felt doubly quiet, the shadows deep. Guards saluted as he passed, and he could almost sense the shift in their stance once he was beyond them, returning to a more relaxed posture. In his chambers, he removed his cloak and sword, placing Longclaw within easy reach as was his habit. He unbuckled his boots and sank onto the edge of his bed. His limbs ached with exhaustion. Outside, through a small window, he caught the glimmer of the moon, a waxing sliver that illuminated the sky. He thought of Ghost, somewhere out in the north, running free. They had parted ways amid the hectic aftermath of the war with the dead, not by Jon's preference, but by necessity. Even so, he missed that pale companion sometimes, the quiet bond they shared as man and wolf. He lay down, closed his eyes, and tried not to think about the outlaws, the Ironborn, the Lannister loyalists, the farmland crises, or the next winter's approach. Sleep came fitfully, carried on the back of a swirl of half-remembered battles and heartbreak. Yet when he woke the next morning, the faint glow of dawn told him at least he'd found a few hours of rest. Thus life in King's Landing continued, day by day, problem by problem, glimmer of hope by glimmer of hope. Jon discovered that ruling was a constant negotiation between the needs of different regions, between the demands of the nobility and the welfare of the small folk, between the realm's past alliances and new possibilities for trade or treaties. He strove to remain fair, to weigh each plea or grievance with the same even hand. If a brash lord demanded an audience to complain about taxes, Jon would listen, and if a fisherwoman approached to ask for compensation for a boat lost at sea due to the war's chaos, he would listen just as carefully. Over time, trust grew. The seeds of unity that had been planted in the long night began to blossom in unexpected ways. In the city, blacksmiths who once toiled for the Lannisters found common cause with stonemasons from the Reach. Dornish spice merchants rubbed elbows with northern fur traders, forging new relationships that went beyond the petty feuds of old. And the children who ran between market stalls often didn't care about sigils or banners, they simply took advantage of the new roads, new goods, new sense that peace might be something real. Of course, not all was smooth. Tormund's expedition to Rosby took longer than expected. Reports trickled back that the outlaws had holed up in an abandoned fortress in the woods. They laid traps, ambushes, forcing Tormund's men to proceed with caution. Eventually, Tormund cornered them, offered them a chance to surrender, and when they refused, the fighting was bloody but decisive. Rosby's roads were cleared, but at a cost of several good men. Jon felt each loss keenly. Still, the roads were safe again, allowing caravans to flow unimpeded. Then came an unexpected development from the north. A group of wildlings, led by a fierce woman named Spear Wife Arya, had settled in the gift near the wall. They'd begun clearing land, building small huts. They claimed the right to farm that area, stating it had always been promised to the Night's Watch. With the watch diminished, many brothers had perished in the war. These free folk believed it was their new home. But local northern lords bristled at the idea, complaining to Sansa that they feared raids from these wildlings if they were not kept in check. Jon's heart twisted at the news. He remembered how he had tried to find a place for the free folk south of the wall. He had done so because they were people like any other, fighting for survival. But he also recalled the deep-rooted mistrust between northerners and wildlings. If not handled carefully, it could spark conflict. He dispatched ravens to Winterfell, telling Sansa to open a dialogue with Spear wife Arya and the northern lords. If need be, Jon would travel north to mediate himself, though for now Sansa's presence might suffice. Amid these concerns, there was also reason to celebrate. A wedding was announced at Riverrun. Edmure Tully's young daughter, one of the few Tullys left, was to marry the son of a minor lord from the Vale, forging a bond that promised to strengthen ties between those regions. They invited Jon, his council, and Sansa to attend. Jon hesitated. He disliked leaving the capital for long. But Tyrion urged him to go, reminding him that kings, if they never ventured to see their realm, might lose touch. Sansa agreed, pointing out that Riverrun was symbolic, a place central to the tragedies of the war, but now hosting a union that might heal old wounds. And so Jon prepared to travel with a modest retinue, Sansa, Brienne, Braavos, and a handful of guards, along with some lesser lords from King's Landing who wanted to represent the crown. Before they departed, Tyrion took Jon aside. "You may want to bring a meaningful gift," Tyrion said lightly. "Something that shows the king's generosity without being ostentatious." Jon frowned. "I'm not much for trinkets." Indeed, Tyrion smirked. "But weddings require a certain display. Perhaps a finely crafted chest of silver from the royal treasury or some bits of jewelry, heirlooms that remained from the Targaryen vaults." Jon sighed. "All right. A chest of silver coin to help them rebuild after the wars. That might actually be useful." Tyrion nodded. "Practical. I like it." They set out on horseback, accompanied by a small caravan for the wedding gifts and provisions. The roads were mostly clear now, though signs of old conflict lingered. A charred farmstead here, a half-collapsed stone bridge there. Soldiers bearing the crown's sigil, an amalgam of dire wolf and dragon, patrolled at intervals. Jon found it odd to see that banner, the creature that combined the Stark wolf with a scaled tail reminiscent of Targaryen heraldry. He'd never demanded a new sigil, but some well-meaning supporters had created it to symbolize his dual heritage. It felt strange whenever he came across it, as though it were an identity he still wasn't entirely sure how to wear. On the road, Sansa rode beside him part of the time, sharing news of the north. "Lord Glover has finally agreed to send more men to help guard the White Harbor trade routes. That was a sticking point for a while, but he came around." "Good," Jon said, scanning the horizon. "We need unity. Too many bandits might see the north's wide stretches as an opportunity." She nodded, then her expression softened. "How are you, Jon?" "Truly?" He glanced at her, a bit startled by the personal question. "I'm managing. It's a lot, as you know. Every day there's a new crisis to solve, a new treaty to sign, a new rumor to dispel. But I'd rather face this than the dead again, that's for certain." Sansa gave a quiet laugh. "We all would. Sometimes I worry we'll forget the horrors we faced. But maybe forgetting is a kindness." "It might be," Jon said softly. "But we mustn't forget entirely, lest we grow complacent." They pressed on. The sun climbed overhead and eventually they made camp by a small stream. Over a simple supper of salted pork and bread, they spoke of the wedding and what to expect. Braavos joked that this would be the first wedding he'd attended in a long time that wouldn't end in bloodshed, at least he hoped so. Brienne rolled her eyes at the memory of all the catastrophic weddings that had littered their recent past. Jon half smiled, privately echoing Davos's hope that no violence would mar this event. The next day, they continued along the King's Road until they reached the lands of House Tully. Riverrun rose ahead, its castle perched at the confluence of the Red Fork and the Tumblestone. The fortress was mostly repaired, though remnants of the siege that once took place there left a few scars on the walls. Banners bearing the Tully trout hung proudly, snapping in a brisk wind. The moat glimmered in the sun, and the gates stood open to welcome guests for the wedding. They were greeted by Edmure Tully himself, older now, lines of worry etched on his face from the years of war and loss. Yet there was a renewed sparkle in his eye. He bowed deeply to Jon and Sansa, his courtesy genuine. "Your Grace, Lady Sansa. An honor to have you both here. And you as well, Ser Braavos, Lady Brienne." Jon dismounted. "Lord Edmure, thank you for hosting us. It's good to see Riverrun looking strong again." The castle's courtyard was busy with preparation for the wedding feast. Servants carried barrels of ale and wine, bushels of flowers, and trays of fresh fish from the nearby waters. A makeshift stage had been erected for musicians. Laughter and chatter filled the air. Jon breathed it in. After so many funerals, it was almost shocking to be present for a celebration of life. Edmure escorted them inside, giving them chambers to rest and wash in before the ceremony. Jon changed into a more formal tunic, dark gray with subtle embroidery that echoed the stark dire wolf, along with a black cloak pinned by a simple silver wolf's head clasp. He felt a pang, remembering how he'd once worn black in the Night's Watch. Everything was different now. The wedding took place in the Great Hall, in front of a septon who had traveled from King's Landing. Candles flickered in iron sconces. The bride, a bright-eyed girl of perhaps 16, wore a gown of pale blue. Her groom, the Vale Lord's son, stood tall in fine clothing of green and white. They exchanged vows before a small crowd of Tully kin, Vale representatives, and invited guests from nearby houses. Edmure looked on with tears shining in his eyes. Sansa seemed moved, though she maintained a composed smile. Jon watched quietly, hoping this union would indeed help unify the Riverlands and the Vale further. Afterward came the feast, a lively affair. Long tables groaned under platters of fish, roast venison, fresh greens, and all manner of pies and tarts. Wine and ale flowed freely, and minstrels sang songs of the old Riverlands heroes. Servants lit additional lanterns as evening settled, creating a warm glow that banished the shadows from the hall. It was a stark contrast to the memories many held of war and strife. Jon sat at the high table near Edmure, Sansa, and the bride's family. He forced himself to eat, though his appetite was never large for feasts. He accepted a goblet of wine, sipped it sparingly. Occasionally, lords or ladies approached to pay respects or to ask a question about the realm. Jon answered politely, trying not to let the swirl of conversation overwhelm him. During a lull, Sansa leaned in. "It's not so bad, is it?" she teased softly. "A feast instead of yet another council session." Jon gave a small, weary smile. "It's a welcome change, to be sure." The bride and groom performed the traditional dances, and guests soon joined. Folk music filled the hall, a spirited tune that set feet tapping. Sansa was pulled into a dance by Edmure's wife, who had a mischievous grin. Brienne, too, found herself coaxed onto the floor by a daring knight from the Vale. Braavos politely declined, content to watch. Jon found himself standing near a table, uncertain if he should join. But then a young lady from a minor river lord's family shyly asked if he would dance. Jon felt awkward, but he could hardly refuse. He offered her his arm, and they joined the swirling couples, the woman guiding him gently through the steps when he stumbled. He caught glimpses of Sansa laughing, spinning with the music, the tension of her station momentarily eased. He saw Braavos sharing a grin with some old bannermen. He saw Brienne, somewhat stiff, but making an effort as she was whisked around by her partner. The bride and groom laughed with youthful exuberance. For a short time, it was possible to imagine that Westeros had always been at peace, that the horrors of war were merely a nightmare from which they'd awakened. When the music finally slowed, Jon escorted his dance partner back to the sidelines, thanked her politely, and stepped away to catch his breath. He realized his heart was racing, not from affection but from the simple strangeness of letting himself engage in joy. It felt foreign, as if a piece of him worried that any laughter, any levity might be snatched away by the next disaster. He drifted toward the edge of the hall, finding a small alcove near a window that looked out onto the moonlit rivers. The water shimmered, reflecting the pale glow of the sky. He could still hear the music, muffled by the thick stone walls. Moments later, footsteps approached, and he turned to see Sansa, her cheeks flushed from dancing, her eyes bright. "There you are," she said, her voice soft. "Hiding from the festivities?" Jon half smiled. "Not hiding. Just observing." She stepped beside him, gazing out the window at the night. "It's lovely here. Peaceful." "It is," Jon said. "I'm glad for Edmure and his family. They deserve this happiness after everything they've been through." They stood in companionable silence, listening to the murmur of the feast behind them. Eventually, Sansa looked at him with a hint of mischief. "I saw you dancing." He chuckled under his breath. "I tried. Not sure how graceful I was." "You did fine." She reached out, squeezed his hand gently. "Moments like these will help the realm remember that we're not just living from crisis to crisis. We can have joy, we can have unions, we can have families." He lowered his gaze to their joined hands. "Yes, maybe that's the hope we need." The music changed to a slower tune, and from the hall came the low hum of voices singing along. Sansa drew back her hand, and for a moment, Jon saw a flicker of longing in her eyes, perhaps for simpler times or for the family they had lost. Then she masked it with a polite smile. We should get back before people wonder where we've gone. Jon nodded. Of course. They returned to the hall and mingled among the guests, offering polite conversation until it was polite to slip away. The newlyweds would retire and the feast would wind down. Edmure clasped Jon's arm, thanked him repeatedly for coming, for the gift of silver that would help restore parts of the castle and the surrounding lands. Jon assured him it was for the good of the realm. Then, accompanied by Sansa, Braavos, and a few guards, he made his way to the chambers prepared for him. It was a quiet night, the air heavy with the scent of river reeds. Jon found a basin of warm water waiting, courtesy of Riverrun's servants, and he washed the sweat of the day from his face. He sank onto the bed, gazing up at the wooden beams. A swirl of thoughts filled his mind, from the wedding to the state of King's Landing, from the outlaws to the free folk in the gift. Peace was fragile, always on the brink of unraveling if any one thread was pulled too hard. But the wedding had shown him that people were willing, indeed yearning, to move on, to mend. He prayed silently to the old gods that this chance would not be squandered. Morning brought fresh sunlight gleaming off the rivers. After a final breakfast with Edmure, Jon and his retinue set out from Riverrun, riding east. Rather than returning directly to King's Landing, Jon decided to take a detour toward Harrenhal. News had reached him that some folk there were still struggling under the castle's cursed reputation and the damage inflicted during the war. Perhaps if the king's presence were seen, if some measure of support was offered, it might bolster morale. They passed through rolling farmland, the fields showing fresh growth. Lambs dotted the hills, crows soared overhead. Sansa rode with him for a while, and they spoke of smaller matters, how the Blackfish had once defended Riverrun, how Harrenhal was said to be haunted by the ghosts of Harren, the Black's victims. They remembered the many times the castle had changed hands during the war, each occupant seemingly ill-fated. Harrenhal loomed in the distance by midday, its colossal tower still partially collapsed, its curtain walls blackened by dragonfire from ages past. The place reeked of sorrow, as if the very stones carried the echoes of screams. Yet it was also a strategic location, situated near the waters of the God's Eye. Jon intended to ensure no new warlord or bandit lord took it as a seat of power. At the castle gates, a handful of guards bearing the new royal banner saluted. Jon entered the vast courtyard. Scaffolding told him that some attempts at repair were underway, though the task was daunting for such a massive fortress. A few groups of peasants were at work, clearing rubble or tending meager gardens in the courtyard's corners. Jon dismounted, and as soon as people recognized him, they bowed. Anxiety flickered across their faces. Harrenhal had known so many lords, so many masters, all promising something different. Jon spent the afternoon touring the grounds. He conversed with the steward in charge of the repairs, learned that funds had been scant, and that many workers were frightened by rumors of curses and shadows. The steward was a man named Marek, tall and gaunt, who wrung his hands as he spoke. "We can fix parts of the castle, my king, but we never have enough coin or labor, and whenever something goes wrong, the workers mutter about ghosts." Jon placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. "No ghosts will harm you. Harrenhal's history is dark, but that doesn't mean its future must be. I'll see that you get more funds and that more workers are sent. If we can put it back in decent shape, it can house garrisons and provide shelter for small folk. We won't abandon it to ruin." Marek visibly relaxed, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, your grace. That will do much to restore hope here." They inspected the immense, half-collapsed main hall. Massive beams rose overhead like the ribs of some long-dead beast. In some places, scorched stone revealed where dragon flame had melted the fortress centuries ago. Jon walked carefully through the rubble. He couldn't help but feel the weight of ghosts, the memory of so many battles, so many ambitions that ended in blood. A swirl of dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed from a broken roof. Sansa shivered beside him. "It feels like a crypt," she murmured. Jon nodded. "Too many have died here." Still, as he spoke, he noticed birds nesting in the upper rafters, the faint cooing of doves or pigeons. Even among ruins, life found a way. He silently resolved that the realm would no longer be a place defined by skeletons of old wars. If Harrenhal could be restored even a fraction of its old grandeur, it might stand as a testament that the darkest curses could be overcome by perseverance. After spending a day and a half at Harrenhal, they left behind extra supplies, money from the crown's coffers, and an official decree that the region would receive the realm's protection. Workers seemed heartened, though they had a monumental task ahead. Jon's retinue departed with well wishes, heading finally back toward King's Landing. Upon return, they discovered new matters demanding attention. Tyrion stood waiting in the courtyard, hands folded behind his back, wearing an expression that mixed relief and worry. "Welcome back, Your Grace. The city's fine, mostly, but we have new problems. There's a delegation from Braavos waiting to speak with you. And news from the north." Jon dismounted, passing his reins to a stable boy. "What news?" Tyrion handed him a scroll. Jon recognized the seal of House Stark, Sansa's hand, presumably, or one of the northern lords. Puzzled, he broke the seal and scanned the contents. His brow furrowed. "It's from Spearwife Arya and some free folk. They've had more trouble. A band of northern knights who don't recognize their claim tried to drive them away from the gift. They fought back. There were casualties on both sides." Sansa hissed softly in dismay. "We can't have open conflict between the free folk and the northern lords. It'll tear the north apart." "We'll settle it," Jon said. "I may have to ride north again, but let me first see what the Braavosi want." "Tyrion, any hint?" Tyrion grimaced. "They want to formalize terms for the crown's debt repayment. Apparently they're concerned about the Iron Bank's share in certain trade ventures. They may also be fishing for privileges in Westeros, like establishing counting houses in major cities." Jon sighed. "Fine. I'll meet with them." They exchanged weary looks, then parted ways. Tyrion would arrange the meeting with the Braavosi delegation, while Jon grabbed a quick meal and changed into attire more fitting for a royal audience. He felt a pang of frustration that each day brought new complications, yet he reminded himself that this was the shape peace took. Negotiation, compromise, delicate balancing acts to ensure no faction felt cheated. In the throne room, still crowned by that twisted lump of melted steel where the Iron Throne once stood, a group of Braavosi bankers awaited. They wore flowing robes of deep blue, their shaved heads and pointed beards hinting at their foreign origin. They spoke through an interpreter, though a few addressed Jon in heavily accented common tongue. They praised the realm's progress in rebuilding, expressed hope that the crown's stable leadership would continue to flourish, and then laid out their demands. They wanted interest rates guaranteed, new offices in Lannisport and Old Town, and a portion of certain taxes set aside as collateral. Jon considered their requests. Tyrion stood by his side as the king's hand, occasionally whispering advice. At length, Jon replied, "We value the Iron Bank's support and will uphold our debts, but establishing your own counting houses will require oversight by local lords. We'll not allow unscrupulous practices that harm our people. If we find that you exploit them, we'll revoke the license." The Braavosi conferred among themselves in low voices, then nodded. They were used to dealing with kings and queens who cowered at the Iron Bank's power, but Jon was not easily cowed. After some haggling, an agreement was drafted that recognized the Iron Bank's stake in Westeros but also safeguarded the realm's autonomy. They sealed it with wax, and the Braavosi departed with courteous bows. By the time the audience ended, the sky outside was streaked with orange and pink. Jon left the throne room feeling drained. His steps echoed on the cracked marble floors as he headed to his solar, intending to write letters to the north. He needed to settle the conflict between the free folk and the northern knights before it escalated. In passing, he saw a group of small folk petitioners waiting in a corridor, farmers from the Crownlands, likely. He paused, told a steward to arrange a meeting with them in the morning, promising he'd hear their needs. The steward nodded and ushered the farmers away. In his solar, Jon found parchment, ink, and a quill waiting. He settled at the desk, leaning forward to compose a letter to the lords of the north, urging them to respect the free folk settlement in the gift. He reminded them that these were not enemies, but allies who had fought against the dead. He wrote sternly that if any more violence occurred, the crown would intervene. Then he drafted a second letter to Spearwife Arya, explaining that she should avoid provocation, that the realm recognized her people's right to settle, but that it must be done peacefully. He finished with a sigh, sealing both letters with a direwolf fan dragon seal. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Jon said, pinching the bridge of his nose. The door opened to reveal Arya, surprising him. She slipped inside, wearing dusty leathers as if she had just arrived from the road. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she carried a small pack slung over her shoulder. Jon stood, face lighting with unexpected warmth. "Arya," he said. "I didn't know you were returning." She shrugged, crossing the room. "Didn't exactly send a raven ahead. I was off in the west. I heard about trouble in the north, so I figured I'd see what you plan to do. I can go there if you want me to. Might be I can talk some sense into them without the weight of your crown overshadowing the conversation." Jon eyed her, remembering her skill at persuasion, if persuasion was the right word for what she did. "I appreciate it. But you don't have to. I know you prefer your freedom. We can handle it." Arya rested a hand on her hip. "I go where I choose, and I choose to help if it means preventing bloodshed. Besides, it's not as though I have a grand calling right now. I've seen what I wanted to see of the seas. Maybe it's time I saw home again." Jon nodded slowly. "All right. If you're willing, head to Winterfell. Speak with Sansa or with the local lords. Let them know we won't tolerate them attacking the free folk. And also talk to Arya. She's tough, but I believe she'll listen to reason if she sees sincerity. The free folk don't like being told what to do, but they know you're a Stark." Arya gave a wry smile. "I'm hardly the Stark they remember, but yes. I'll do it." She set her pack down. "I'll rest here tonight, leave at first light." He drew her into a brief embrace, mindful of how rare such moments were in their changed world. She returned it, and for an instant, they were just siblings again, the ghosts of the wars not quite so heavy on them. Early next morning, Arya departed, riding a swift courser northward. Jon watched her go from the Red Keep's walls, a swirl of mixed feelings in his chest, pride, worry, and something like relief that he had someone he trusted on the ground in the north. Then he turned back to the day's duties. Sansa soon joined him, wearing traveling clothes of her own. She intended to remain in King's Landing for a while longer, but she and Jon both kept an eye on the possibility that she, too, might need to head north if tensions escalated further. Tyrion had scheduled another round of meetings, including an audience with a delegation from Dorne. They had arrived overnight, bringing with them exotic fruits and spiced wines as gifts. Jon prepared himself for more negotiations, though he hoped it might be more cordial, given Dorne's relative independence and the respect they'd shown him after the war. In the newly refurbished council chamber, the Dornish representatives entered. A tall woman with olive skin and dark hair braided with golden threads, flanked by two men in bright robes. They bowed with measured grace. The woman introduced herself as Lady Nymella Santagar, speaking on behalf of the Prince of Dorne. "We bring warm greetings from the south," she said, "and an offer of further trade relations with King's Landing. Our markets thrive once more, and we would share our bounty with the realm at a fair price, of course." Jon inclined his head. "The realm welcomes Dornish goods. We need them, especially while other areas rebuild. What does your prince desire in return?" Nymella smiled. "Only that the king continue to recognize Dorne's sovereignty in matters of internal governance. We remain part of the Seven Kingdoms, but we value the tradition that allows us certain freedoms. We would also like more say in the Royal Council, given Dorne's unique position." Jon considered her words carefully. Dorne had historically been an outlier, often clashing with the Iron Throne or simply ignoring it when it suited them. Yet they had sent troops to fight the dead, forging a bond in blood. "You shall have your freedoms, as we agreed. And a Dornish representative on the council makes sense, so your voice is heard at all times. We only ask that you abide by the realm's overarching laws, no raids or private wars against other regions without crown mediation." "Dorne has no interest in raids," Nymella said, lifting a brow in mild amusement. "Our prince wishes only for stability and profit, as do we all. We will abide by the realm's laws." They formalized an arrangement, deciding that Nymella would remain in King's Landing for a period to represent Dornish interests. She presented small tokens of goodwill, a cask of rare Dornish red, crates of lemons and pomegranates, and intricately wrought silver cups. Jon accepted them graciously, promising that the crown would ensure safe trade routes for Dornish caravans traveling north. As the days wore on, each new negotiation, each letter from the north or the Vale, each petition from the small folk reinforced the realm's delicate balance. Jon spent endless hours signing decrees, hearing disputes, coordinating with his advisors, and occasionally idling out to quell trouble at the city's edges. He tried to remain as accessible as a king could, though he often felt pulled in 1,000 directions. In fleeting moments of quiet, he would find himself in the Godwood, a small courtyard in the Red Keep that had been refashioned to honor both the old gods and the Seven. The weirwood sapling there was young, transplanted at Jon's request. Its bark was pale, but no face had yet been carved on it. Jon would stand beneath its fledgling branches, remembering the wind in the weirwoods of Winterfell, feeling a ghost of that deep northern hush. Sometimes Bran joined him, though his visits were rare, as if the boy who was the three-eyed raven perceived the realm in 1,000 ways that went beyond a small courtyard. One late evening, after a long meeting with the council, Jon retreated to that quiet spot. The city was hushed, the torches in the red keep casting dancing light on the walls. He stood near the sapling, breathing deeply, trying to still the churn of his thoughts. Then came soft footsteps behind him and Sansa's gentle voice. "I thought I might find you here." He turned, saw her approach in a simple gown, her hair partially unbound. "I needed some air." She stood beside him, looking at the young weirwood. "It's growing slowly but surely." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "Like the realm?" Jon nodded. "Yes. Slowly, but it's happening." Sansa studied him, her gaze perceptive. "You look burdened." He let out a weary sigh. "I'm trying to do right by everyone. Dorne, the North, the Free Folk, the Ironborn, the Riverlands. The list is endless. And sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for it." She touched his arm gently. "The realm believes you are. I believe you are." Her certainty was a comfort, and he placed his hand atop hers, grateful for her support. In the quiet of that makeshift godwood, he felt the swirl of the world calm just a little. The night sky above glimmered with stars, the breeze carried the faint smell of the sea, and somewhere in the city below, life went on, people dreaming, children growing, old wounds healing. He closed his eyes, let the moment settle into his bones. When he spoke again, his voice was almost a whisper. "We've come so far since the long night. It's strange to think how close we were to losing everything. Now we have a chance to build a world free of that terror, maybe not free of all darkness, but better than it was." Sansa's fingers tightened around his. "We will. And you'll lead it. The people love you, Jon. They see the sacrifices you made. They won't forget." Jon opened his eyes, meeting her earnest gaze. "Love is a tricky thing in politics, but I'll do my best not to disappoint them." She nodded, stepping back, letting her hand fall to her side. "Then let's do it together, as we always have. Good night, Jon." He watched her go, the torchlight flickering against her auburn hair. In the silence that followed, he turned back to the sapling, letting its pale bark fill his vision. The old gods might be far from this southern city, but a piece of the north lived here now, a living reminder of the past and a quiet promise for the future. He thought of Ghost, Arya, the words of the Night's Watch vow, and the line that meant the most: "I am the shield that guards the realms of men." That vow still guided him, even now. Especially now. As the months pressed on, Arya sent ravens detailing her progress in the north. She met with lords who grumbled but eventually agreed not to harass the free folk if they kept to their lands. She convinced Arya to keep her people from raiding neighboring settlements, forging a tenuous peace. Spearwife Arya wrote to Jon as well, thanking him for respecting their right to settle, expressing cautious optimism that perhaps the free folk and northerners could coexist. Jon breathed relief at that news. Tormund returned from Rosby victorious, only to be dispatched again when rumors arose of a pirate fleet menacing the coast near Cracklaw Point. Ser Davos joined him, leading a few newly built royal galleys to confront the threat. Jon prayed for their success, feeling once more the burden of sending men he cared about into potential danger. Yet these threats had to be met, or else they would fester, eventually exploding into something far worse. Occasionally, Jon woke in the small hours of the night, heart pounding from dreams of old battles. Sometimes he saw the Night King's inhuman eyes or the flash of dragonfire over King's Landing. Other nights he dreamed he was back at Castle Black, hearing the horns blow, bracing for the dead to surge over the walls. In those moments, he would sit up, sweat beading on his brow, and remind himself that those nightmares were behind him. The war against the dead had ended. There was a new war now, a war against chaos and hunger and the ghosts of hatred. It was less dramatic, perhaps, but no less important. Summer advanced and the city bloomed with color. Fields outside King's Landing sprouted green shoots of wheat and barley. Orchards in the Crownlands bore fruit. Trade ships unloaded casks of Arbor wine, Dornish peppers, silks from the free cities, and salted fish from the north. The horizon filled with sails of many designs, though the royal fleet patrolled to keep them safe from pirates. In the streets, buskers played lively tunes, children chased each other around the squares, and the market stalls teemed with life. Visiting lords from the Stormlands or the Vale seemed pleased by the city's recovering spirit, though some worried about how long it would last. Jon insisted on forging unity, telling them all that if they wanted to keep the peace, they had to contribute to it, send men, send supplies, keep their own lands safe from bandits or usurpers. One bright morning, as he walked the city walls to inspect the new fortifications, he saw a group of children playing near the base of the walls, engaged in a mock battle with wooden swords. They shouted about fighting ice monsters and saving the kingdom, clearly imitating the stories told about the long night. Jon paused, leaning on the parapet. A strange mixture of pride and sadness filled him. The stories had become something heroic in the minds of these children, but the reality had been horror and death. Still, if it inspired them to be brave in the face of future dangers, so be it. A guard approached respectfully. "Your Grace, Lord Tyrion requests your presence in the council chamber. There's news from the west." Jon sighed, thanked the guard, and descended from the wall. Duty never ended, but at least now duty was about mending rather than mere survival. He walked through the courtyards with steady purpose, cloak trailing behind him, the faint calls of the city's life echoing in his ears. Perhaps he would never escape the weight of being king, but if that weight was what it took to keep these children safe, he would bear it. Every day he reminded himself why he had accepted this crown in the first place, not for glory, but for them, for all of them. In the council chamber, Tyrion, Braavos, freshly returned from chasing pirates, and Sansa waited. Brienne stood guard as always. A letter lay on the table bearing the seal of House Ironwood of Dorne. Tyrion tapped it thoughtfully. "We have a border dispute between House Ironwood and a Reach bannerman," Tyrion explained. "They claim parts of the Dornish marches. Each side says the other is trespassing. They're demanding the king's arbitration." Jon took a seat, exhaling. "All right, let's settle it before it sparks actual fighting. Draw up letters to both sides, tell them to send envoys. We'll hear them out and make a ruling." He glanced at Braavos. "How did the mission against the pirates go?" Davos's mouth twitched in a small grin. "They scattered once they saw we had galleys with scorpions mounted. Tormund led a raid on their main hideout, burned a few pirate ships in harbor. We captured some, hanged the ringleaders, gave the rest a chance to swear loyalty to the crown if they'd renounce piracy. Some took it, others tried to fight. All in all, we've secured Cracklaw Point." Jon nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "Well done. Thank Tormund for me." Sansa added, "Also, we've had new offers from the free cities, Tyrosh, Myr, Braavos. They want to expand trade. The problem is, they all want favored status. We can't give it to everyone, or else the privileges mean nothing." Tyrion spoke up. "We might arrange rotating trade privileges or different ports assigned to each city. That way, no single city dominates the market." Jon leaned back in his chair. "That sounds fair. Let's do that. We'll keep the realm open to trade but balanced, so no one party grows too powerful." They continued through a litany of issues: taxation rates, the distribution of building materials for the city's reconstruction, the state of the King's Road where it passed the Blackwater Rush. It all blurred together in a tapestry of governance, each thread vital for holding the realm's stability. At dusk, Jon returned to the courtyard, the sky streaked with gold and crimson. He watched as men loaded wagons with newly arrived timber from the north. Lanterns were lit, casting flickering shadows. Somewhere, a blacksmith's hammer rang out, rhythmic and strong. He paused, savoring a moment of stillness. The city was loud and bustling, yet beneath the noise lay a hum of cooperation that had once been unthinkable. He remembered when he first arrived in King's Landing, how the charred streets had smelled of despair, how the heartbreak of war lingered in every corner. Now, though scars remained, laughter had returned, markets thrived, families found places to rest their heads without fear. It was not perfect. It never would be. But it was something worth preserving, worth fighting for. And the realm, in turn, seemed to accept him as king, reluctant or otherwise. The North still called him their own, the Vale recognized his steadiness, the Riverlands respected his fairness, the Ironborn tested him but grudgingly followed, Dorne pursued its own brand of alliance, and the Stormlands, under Gendry Baratheon, had grown loyal, forging new connections. All those bonds rested on his shoulders. In quiet moments, Jon thought of Daenerys, of the path she had taken and how it had ended. He wondered if she had glimpsed such a future, peace, unity, only to have it slip away in the madness of war and tragedy. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could make sure her dream of a better world lived on in some form, shaped by compassion rather than fire and blood. That night, he climbed once more to the Red Keep's highest vantage, letting the wind tug at his cloak. The city spread out below, a patchwork of flickering lights and half-rebuilt spires. The harbor beyond held ships swaying gently against the tides. He closed his eyes, inhaled the salt-tinged breeze, and listened. The hush of darkness carried faint echoes, wagons creaking, distant laughter, a lullaby sung by a mother to her child. These were the sounds of life continuing, free from the terror of an undead army or the horror of dragonfire unleashed. He remembered standing on these ramparts months ago, crowned yet unsure, feeling the crushing weight of the realm's hopes. Now he felt something else along with that weight, a measure of resolve tempered by time and experience. He had made mistakes, would make more, but he was no longer paralyzed by doubt. The realm needed him, and he needed them. Together, they had made progress, fragile but real. In that moment, he whispered a silent vow to the old gods, to the seven, to the memory of those lost. He would not fail them. He might not be the perfect king. He might not even want to be king. But as long as he sat on that throne, however melted and symbolic it might be, he would serve the people with everything he had. He thought of his father, Ned Stark, and the lessons of honor he had taught. He thought of the free folk and how they had chosen to stand with the living. He thought of all the alliances formed and the tragedies endured. Every soul lost was a reminder of the cost of letting the realm slide back into chaos. When he finally turned to descend the steps, the moon was high and bright, illuminating his path. The city had grown quieter, the voices of the night subdued. Guards saluted as he passed, and he nodded, acknowledging their vigil. In his chambers, he found a single candle burning, left by a dutiful servant. He extinguished it after stripping off his boots and jerkin. Longclaw stood against the wall, the white wolf pommel watching over him. He lay down, eyes to the ceiling, mind full of thoughts about roads, taxes, farmland, pirates, free folk, and all the rest. But somewhere within that storm, there was a small, unwavering flame of hope. Time slipped by as the realm continued to knit itself back together. The seeds of unity had taken root, and though new problems always arose, they were confronted by a king and his council who valued cooperation over tyranny. Regions that once warred against one another now sent delegates to stand side by side in the small council chamber, hashing out differences through words instead of blades. The crown's authority was recognized, but also tempered by the voices of those who had suffered enough to know the cost of blind obedience. A year passed, then too. King's Landing further shed its scars, old neighborhoods reviving with fresh paint and new structures. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the hum of merchant carts. Ships from beyond the narrow sea brought goods and travelers seeking fortune or refuge in the stabilized kingdom. The roads that once echoed with the march of armies now bustled with caravans carrying produce, textiles, and tools. Few forgot the wars, but many looked to the future with guarded optimism. Jon found a rhythm in his reign, guided by the principle he cherished most: duty to the realm, duty to the living. He relied on Sansa's wisdom, Tyrion's cunning, Davos's steady moral compass, Brienne's integrity. Bran, in his cryptic way, offered insights that sometimes felt like glimpses into fate itself. Asha Greyjoy remained a stubborn ally, ensuring the Ironborn did not stray from their new path. Gendry Baratheon strengthened the Stormlands, forging roads and alliances that brought fresh prosperity to once ravaged towns. The Lords of the Vale, the Reach, and the Westerlands found that unity gave them more trade, more peace, more chance to grow. Dorne stood proudly autonomous in its customs, yet loyal enough to the crown to maintain the balance. Whenever Jon felt overwhelmed, he thought of the children in the streets, the orphans who now had safer homes, the farmers who brought their harvest to market without fear. He thought of those quiet nights on the battlements, hearing the hush of a city at rest instead of the screams of war. He thought of the vow he once swore to defend the realms of men, and he realized that vow extended beyond the wall to all corners of Westeros. That realization shaped him every day, reminding him that no crown, no birthright, no prophecy was more important than protecting life and fostering hope. And so the kingdom endured and improved under the quiet watch of the man once named Jon Snow, now king of the Seven Kingdoms by the will of every great house that saw in him the best chance for peace. He had never sought it, but he accepted it, wearing the crown without vanity or thirst for power, but with a sense of solemn purpose. Though ghosts of the past lingered in every ruin, though the memory of the dead could never fully be banished, the living carried on, forging a tomorrow more radiant than the yesterday from which they had all emerged, bruised yet unbroken. In the third year of Jon's reign, on an evening that felt both balmy and filled with a drifting sense of promise, the realm was still moving through the slow, unsteady dance of healing. The city of King's Landing glowed under the last stretch of summer sunlight, each stone tinged with orange and gold. Rebuilding efforts had erased many of the war's more visible scars. The charred husks of once collapsed buildings had given way to new structures bearing fresh plaster. The markets overflowed with fruits and grains from the Reach, with salted fish from the north, with Dornish peppers and arbor wines. Ships crowded the harbor in greater numbers than any time in recent memory. The Red Keep, still partially scorched in places, was also adorned with signs of new life. Vines crept up the old walls, bright flowers dotted the courtyard gardens, and the presence of courtiers, merchants, travelers, and petitioners animated the corridors. Yet for all the city's renewed vitality, a certain heaviness clung to the realm. It was not the specter of immediate war, no armies massed on the horizon, and most old feuds lay dormant, but rather a natural wariness that years of conflict and betrayal had instilled in even the most optimistic hearts. People cherished the peace even as they glanced over their shoulders. Thus, every new rumor seemed to stir quiet concern, a whispered threat of banditry in the Westerlands, a suggestion that the Greyjoys might slip back into old ways, an overheard conversation that the North might want independence if grievances were not addressed. The realm had come far, but its unity rested on a precarious balance, one that Jon Snow, now well into his third year as king, strove to maintain with tireless dedication. He had found his rhythms. Each morning, before the sun had fully risen, he walked the Red Keep's yards or paced along the walls, exchanging quiet greetings with the guards, checking small corners of the castle that had once stood ravaged. Sometimes he went to the patch of Godwood, still only a modest courtyard with a young weirwood sapling, and stood there in meditation, recalling the hush of Winterfell's ancient heart tree. Then came his daily barrage of tasks, the small council sessions, the scrolls delivered by ravens, the constant stream of petitioners. Late in the evenings, he might catch a moment of solitude, climbing one of the tower steps to look upon the city aglow with torches and lanterns. When he saw how many people now lived without fear of White Walkers or marauding armies, he could not help but feel a quiet gratitude, even if he had never wished to be the one who wore the crown. On this particular evening, he was in the council chamber, lit by a trio of tall windows open to the warm summer breeze. Tyrion Lannister, his hand, sat to his right with a scattering of parchment before him. Sansa was on Jon's left, her keen gaze drifting between each speaker. Braavos stood off to one side, arms folded, his expression thoughtful. Across the table sat an envoy from the Westerlands, a gaunt man named Lord Morwen Lefford, who had arrived that morning with a report of fresh tensions in the region. Lord Lefford's voice wavered as he spoke, clearly anxious about the matter at hand. "We've had trouble near Ashmark. A group of hedge knights turned brigands have been harrying shipments of grain. Some of the farmers claim these men once served House Lannister, but now they answer to no one. They raid, vanish into the hills, and reappear to strike again. My lord father's tried dispatching his own men, but the region's rough terrain provides cover." Tyrion drummed his fingers on the tabletop. Remnants of old loyalties or opportunists capitalizing on the disorder? Likely a bit of both. In any event, we can't have roving outlaws causing havoc so close to Lannisport. Sansa inclined her head. If these brigands undermine the region's stability, it won't be long before trade convoys from the Reach or the Riverlands stop traveling that route. That could starve out Lannisport in a year or two if it's not addressed. Jon, who had been listening intently, looked at the envoy. "We'll send a detachment of the Crown's forces. Not a large army, but a swift and skilled company. They'll coordinate with your father to track the brigands, offer safe escort to shipments, and put a final end to these raids. Lord Morwen, can you provide guides who know the land well?" Lord Lefford nodded, relief evident in his lined face. "Yes, your grace. We can supply guides, huntsmen, local scouts. We have a network of mountain passes. They'll know where these men hide." Jon glanced at Tyrion, who made a quick note. "We'll see that it's done," Tyrion said. "In the meantime, the Crown will issue a bounty on any proven brigand leader. That might help flush them out if they have local enablers." Jon considered it, then agreed. "That's settled then. We don't want this to escalate. Thank you, Lord Morwen, for bringing it to our attention. We'll contact you with details of when the detachment will depart." The Lord expressed his gratitude, bowed, and departed the chamber. Silence followed as Jon exhaled. It was just one of a dozen issues clamoring for attention on any given day, a far cry from the cataclysmic wars they had survived, but significant enough to disrupt the fragile peace if left unchecked. Tyrion shuffled his parchments, Sansa scanned a short letter from the Vale, and Braavos cleared his throat. "That's not all," Braavos said quietly, glancing at Jon. "A raven came from Asha Greyjoy this morning from Pike. She says some of the old Ironborn malcontents are stirring again, using the name of a certain Roderick the Red, claiming he's a direct descendant of King Balan's line, though that's likely nonsense. He's preaching about the old way, trying to stir up raids. Asha's quashed him before, but he's reappeared with a few longships. Jon's brow furrowed. If this Roderick the Red is mustering ships, we can't let them terrorize the coasts. Have we any proof he's actually attacked anyone yet? Braavos shook his head. Asha says not yet. Mostly it's talk and small gatherings. She believes it's best to step on it now before it grows. She's requested either coin or manpower, or both, to assist in patrolling the Isles and making a show of force. Seems that if the crown backs her publicly, it'll dissuade these would-be reavers. Sansa set down her letter. We should. The Iron Islands have come a long way under Asha's reluctant but steady leadership. If we don't support her when she asks, it'll look like the crown is indifferent to the Isles, and that would only fuel more rebellion. Tyrion looked at Jon. Coin's tight but not scarce. We can spare enough to help fund a small patrol fleet. Or if we prefer a more direct message, we can send a few of our newly commissioned war galleys, nothing that suggests invasion, just a demonstration that the crown stands with Asha. That might be enough to quell the trouble. Jon considered his options. I'd rather not appear to the Ironborn that we're swooping in to rule them with an iron fist. Asha's done well in keeping them from reverting to constant reaving. Let's send her coin and offer some advisors, captains we trust, to train her men in new naval tactics. Then if Roderick the Red escalates, we'll send a small fleet. Make sure the message is clear that we respect the Iron Islands, but won't tolerate raids. The others agreed, and Tyrion set about drafting the official orders. Hours later, as dusk approached, the meeting wound down. Braavos left to handle some matters at the docks, and Tyrion lugged his parchments to the treasury office. Sansa lingered, watching the last of the summer sun fade from the sky through the windows. Jon rose, rolling tension from his shoulders. "Walk with me," he said to Sansa. She nodded, and together they departed the chamber, descending a corridor that led outside. The Red Keep's courtyard was alive with the glow of lanterns and torches. The warmth in the air seemed to promise a mild evening. Servants crossed from one doorway to another, carrying baskets of supplies or trays of food. Overhead, a sky of cobalt deepened into twilight, strewn with the first glimmer of stars. Jon and Sansa meandered past a small knot of newly arrived petitioners, who bowed at the sight of them. Jon acknowledged their deference with a nod but continued onward, heading to a portion of the keep that overlooked Blackwater Bay. There, along a balustrade, they could stand in a relative hush and watch the ship's lanterns flicker on the darkening water. Sansa leaned her hands against the stone rail, the breeze tugging lightly at her auburn hair. "It never stops, does it?" she said after a moment, her voice gentle. "No," Jon admitted, "but I suppose if it did, that might be a sign we'd grown complacent." She looked sideways at him. "You've grown more comfortable in this role." Jon considered his words. "I've grown more accustomed, perhaps. Comfortable might be too strong a term. But yes, I suppose I know better now how to handle each crisis, or who to send where, or when to hold back. And I see results. People are living safer lives than they did years ago. That counts for something." She smiled, and it reached her blue eyes. "Father would be proud," she said softly. "We all would." He felt a pang, remembering Ned Stark, remembering how that honorable man had shaped him without ever telling him the true nature of his parentage. But there was no bitterness left in that memory, just gratitude and a faint ache of loss. "I hope I'm doing him justice," Jon murmured. They stood there a while longer, watching the silhouettes of ships in the bay. Across the water, the faint shimmer of lamps from the city's outskirts and dockside neighborhoods reflected on the gentle waves. In the quiet, Jon allowed himself a moment of appreciation. For the realm that was still standing, for the sibling at his side, for the memory of old ties that had carried them all this far. Eventually, he parted from Sansa and sought his chambers. A few corridors still smelled faintly of burnt wood from the wars past, but most had been repaired or replaced with fresh timbers. The servants had left a tray of simple fare, roasted fish, bread, and a cup of watered wine. Jon ate sparingly, changed into more comfortable clothes, and read a scroll from the North's new watchers on the wall, fewer than ever, but enough to patrol for wildling disputes or any stray threat that might loom beyond. Word was that the free folk settlements in the Gift continued to expand. There had been small skirmishes with local hill tribes, but Arya's negotiations a while back had paved the way for tenuous cooperation. He read that Arya, the spear wife, had become something of a leader among the free folk in that region, forging trade with some open-minded northern stewards. It was progress. He smiled faintly, reflecting on how improbable it once seemed that free folk and northerners would coexist in relative peace. Sleep eventually claimed him, though his dreams proved restless. He saw fleeting images of the Night King's piercing gaze, the swirl of snow, the cracking ice. Then, abrupt as a storm, the dream shifted to the vision of a once mighty dragon circling over a scorched city. He awoke with a jolt, heart pounding, the echoes of war roaring in his ears. But it was only a dream. He let out a shaking breath, ran a hand over his face, and reminded himself of the sunlight that would come soon enough. In the days that followed, matters proceeded apace. A few new lords arrived to pay homage or to request an audience to discuss their concerns. The city's trade continued to flourish, with more Myrish and Braavosi merchants competing for docks. Tyrion oversaw the crown's finances with adept cunning, balancing expenditures between the navy, the city watch, and the reconstruction projects across Westeros. The master of whisperers, an unassuming woman named Jocelyn Rivers, rumored to be distantly related to House Tully, brought word of quiet conspiracies in the Westerlands, but nothing that seemed poised to erupt into major conflict. One bright afternoon, Jon took a detachment of guards and rode out beyond the city walls. He liked to see the countryside himself, wheat fields swaying in the breeze, orchard groves heavy with apples or pears, newly built cottages or barns that replaced those destroyed in past wars. He stopped at a small village that had sprouted near the Rose Road, where farmers had begun cultivating market gardens for King's Landing. Children gawked at the sight of the king, and a small cluster of villagers assembled to greet him. An older man with a gray-flecked beard offered Jon a handful of freshly picked cherries as a gift of welcome. Jon thanked him, tried one, found it sweet as summer, and told the villagers that he would make certain their roads remained safe for trade. That promise visibly relieved them, some still haunted by the memory of roving soldiers or bandits from years past. He spent some time speaking with the village headwoman, an energetic matron named Ellen, forging a sense of trust. She mentioned that the harvest had been good, but they feared the next wave of settlers might encroach on their fields without proper boundaries. Jon assured her that land grants were being organized, that local lords would not be allowed to seize farmland indiscriminately. It was a slow process, but his council was working toward fairer land divisions. By the time he departed, the villagers appeared heartened, even if wariness still flickered in their eyes. It took more than a few years to shake off the scars of devastation. Upon returning to the Red Keep, Jon found a new letter waiting from the Vale. Lord Royce had taken ill, and the younger lords who governed in his stead sought guidance on a matter of inheritance and local feuds. They requested that the king send a mediator. Sansa volunteered to travel, citing her familiarity with the Vale lords and the respect they had shown her when she was younger. Jon agreed, grateful for her willingness, and within a few days she departed with a retinue of trusted knights, leaving him once more to juggle the day-to-day concerns of the capital. Without Sansa's presence in the council chambers, the dynamic shifted slightly. Tyrion managed the finances, Braavos oversaw the navy and shipping, Brienne attended to matters of security in the city, and Jocelyn Rivers supplied intelligence on possible threats. Jon relied more on each of them. Occasionally, he wrote to Sansa in the Vale, updating her on the city's developments and asking after the Vale's progress. She responded with measured optimism. Lord Royce was recovering, and it seemed the inheritance dispute might be resolved without swords crossing. That was all to the good, though Jon missed having her steady counsel at his side. Weeks trundled onward, and a new swirl of rumors reached King's Landing. Talk of a self-proclaimed Black Lion in the Westerlands, a woman who claimed distant kinship to House Lannister and advocated for a restoration of Lannister supremacy. Tyrion rolled his eyes at the very mention of it. Another pretender to a broken legacy, he remarked during one council session. If my father were alive, he'd have this so-called Black Lion's head on a spike by sundown. But we're not Tywin Lannister, are we? Jon's expression was thoughtful. No, we're not. We won't answer with brutality unless forced. But keep an ear out, these small movements can become large if ignored. Jocelyn Rivers nodded. We have whispers that the Black Lion's supporters are mostly disenchanted minor knights or peasants who recall the wealth that House Lannister once brought to the region. But they're not heavily armed. If they take any actual militant steps, we'll know. Jon left it at that, though he privately resolved to watch the situation closely. He had seen how quickly a populist figure could galvanize the downtrodden, some for noble reasons but more often out of resentment or opportunism. If this black lion approached bandits or rebellious lords, the region might flare like a tinderbox. Amid all these developments, a curious set of tidings arrived by ship from the south. A merchant vessel from Nathy had reached Dorne's coastline, bringing exotic goods, delicate silks, carved shells, sweet-smelling oils. Word spread that the foreigners aboard wished to meet the king, intrigued by the story of how Westeros had survived the long night. They carried gifts as well as pleas for assistance with pirates who prowled the summer sea. The Prince of Dorne, hearing of this, wrote to Jon, suggesting that if the king were to meet with these travelers, it might pave the way for trade beyond even the free cities. Jon considered the invitation. Tyrion, ever the strategist, pointed out that forging relations beyond Essos might open entirely new markets. Braavos, whose experience with smuggling had shown him how wide the world truly was, said it could only help if Westeros demonstrated a benevolent reach. Yet traveling all the way to Dorne was no small decision. The result was a compromise. Jon would host a small delegation from Nathy in King's Landing, offering them hospitality at the Red Keep. If they wished for alliances or help dealing with pirates, that could be discussed with the Crown's advisors. Raven sped south to arrange the meeting, and over the next few weeks, the city prepared to welcome guests from across the sea. When the day finally came, the gates opened to admit a small procession, half a dozen dark-skinned men and women in airy robes of pale linen, accompanied by a handful of armed guards from Dorne. They moved through the bustling streets with wide eyes at the teeming crowds and the towering walls. In the Red Keep's courtyard, Jon greeted them personally. He was struck by the softness of their manners, the gentle way they spoke, and the musical lilt of their accent. Their leader, a woman named Arya, bowed low, offering a woven basket of bright Nathy flowers and a carved wooden figurine depicting a butterfly, apparently a revered symbol in their homeland. Jon welcomed them with courtesy, instructing the household staff to prepare rooms that were airy and comfortable, mindful that Nathy was said to be a land of gentle warmth and peace. Arya and her companions expressed gratitude. They possessed an almost ethereal calm, not quite shy but radiating a peaceful demeanor that many of the courtiers found disarming. That evening, a small feast was held in the newly refurbished banquet hall where the Nathy guests observed each custom with polite curiosity, sampling bread, roast meat, and Dornish wine. Their own diet, Jon learned, relied heavily on fruit, fish, and honey preparations. Nonetheless, they adapted without complaint. Over the next few days, Arya explained their plight. Pirates who roamed the summer sea sometimes raided Nathy's coastline, stealing away men, women, and children for slavery that was abhorred in Westeros but still thrived in parts of Essos. Nathy had few defenses, lacking a strong navy or heavily fortified cities. Their people were peaceful by custom, and they sought any alliance that might help deter these pirate fleets. Jon's heart ached at the mention of slavery. He recalled how Daenerys had once fought to end slavery in Slaver's Bay, though her path and fate had been complicated. Even now, the Crown had minimal influence over the deeper regions of Essos. But if a small show of force or an alliance might deter slavers from preying on Nathy, Jon considered it worth exploring. He convened a council session with Arya in attendance, using an interpreter who had traveled from Dorne to help bridge some linguistic gaps. "We can't police the summer sea entirely," Tyrion said candidly. "Our ships are limited and we must maintain security in Westeros first. But perhaps a few royal galleys stationed in Dorne, rotating patrols with Prince Corran's vessels, could dissuade these pirates." Arya listened, eyes shining with hope. "Even a little help may spare my people much suffering. If the slavers face real resistance, they might seek easier targets, though that only shifts the burden to others. Still, we must save who we can." Jon looked at Braavos. "Could we arrange such a patrol?" Braavos nodded, though his voice was measured. "We could, though it's a long way to the summer sea. We'd be working with Dornish captains. We'll need supplies in Sunspear or Planky Town. But yes, it's doable." Jon turned back to Arya. "We'll do what we can. We ask in return only for honest friendship and an understanding that if the day comes when you can repay the favor, you will." She bowed low, her companions placing hands over their hearts. "We will never forget your kindness, my king," she said, accent lilting. "Nathy seeks only peace, and if in the future we can aid you in any way, we shall." With that, an accord was drafted. Dorne and the Crown would dispatch a handful of ships on a rotating basis, patrolling to protect Nathy's shores. Arya suggested some local navigators might provide knowledge of hidden coves and reefs. In exchange, Nathy would open its small harbors to Westerosi vessels, share certain goods, rare ointments, and perfumes from their island's flora, and pledge to aid any Westerosi travelers who ended up shipwrecked on their shores. It was not a treaty of enormous strategic gain for Westeros, but it was an act of compassion and a step toward broadening the realm's influence as a protector rather than a conqueror. During their stay, the Nathy guests ventured into King's Landing's markets with wide-eyed wonder. Arya seemed especially taken by the variety of cultures she found there, men and women from the north wearing heavy cloaks despite the summer heat, merchants from the free cities hawking spices, Dornish traders bartering with smallfolk. She spoke often of how her homeland had once been a place of harmony, free from war, until outsiders discovered they could exploit Nathy's gentle people for the slave trade. As she walked the city, children gaped at her butterfly emblem and she gave them small woven trinkets in return, inciting giggles of delight. After finalizing the details of the alliance, Arya prepared to depart. On her final day at the Red Keep, she came before Jon with one last gift, a small jar of pale gold lotion said to soothe any burn or wound. She pressed it into his hands, explaining in her melodic accent that it was a symbol of healing. He thanked her, promising to remain true to their agreement. At dawn the next day, the Nathy delegation set out for Dorne, from where they would sail home. Jon wondered if their presence in King's Landing might one day be remembered as the start of a broader outreach to distant lands. More important was the tangible help that might save innocents from the horrors of enslavement. In the aftermath of their departure, the city was abuzz with curiosity over the exotic visitors. Minstrels composed ballads of butterflies in the Red Keep. The small folk repeated wild tales of an island paradise across the sea where no one raised a weapon except that evil men came to snatch them away. Meanwhile, the realm's more pressing concerns did not abate. The situation in the Westerlands with rumored brigands and the so-called Black Lion simmered, though no open revolt had begun. Tormund Giantsbane, patrolling the coasts with Davos's old sea smuggler instincts, reported that Roderick the Red on Pike had quieted under Asha's watchful eye for now. Weeks turned into months and King's Landing saw the onset of a mild autumn. The leaves of the few city trees turned golden brown, swirling in the street. Amid the bustling crowds, docks remained busy, though storms occasionally disrupted trade routes. Sansa wrote from the Vale that she had successfully resolved their inheritance disputes and would soon return, possibly bringing a cadre of Vale knights who wished to pay homage to the king. Jon anticipated her arrival, missing her steady presence. Then, without warning, word arrived that House Ironwood of Dorne had faced a new incursion by outlaws, possibly connected to a band that once roamed near the marches. They called themselves the Scorpion's Tail, a reference to Dorne's fierce symbol. These were not loyal to the crown or to Prince Corran. They saw themselves as an independent band of freedom fighters or raiders, depending on who told the tale. They claimed Dorne should never have bent the knee, even in the loose arrangement that allowed them wide autonomy. This band seized a small keep near the Broken Arm and threatened travelers. The local lords asked the crown for help, but also assured the king they might handle it alone. Jon debated how involved to become, mindful that Dorne prized its independence. He held a council with Tyrion, Davos, Brienne, and Jocelyn Rivers. Tyrion advised a minimal approach to show respect for Dornish sovereignty. Davos warned that ignoring the problem might let the outlaws fester into a larger rebellion. Brienne suggested dispatching a small contingent to bolster the Dornish lords who were fighting the rebels. After discussion, Jon decided on a compromise. He would send a royal envoy, Ser Jaime Fossaway, a trusted knight well-versed in negotiations, and a token force to coordinate with Prince Corran. If the Dornish lords wanted help, they had it. If they declined, the royal force would remain on standby until asked. By the time Sansa returned from the Vale, that measure was already in motion. She arrived in the city at midday, escorted by a dozen knights in shining mail, greeted by cheers from onlookers who had come to know her as a figure of grace and tempered wisdom. Jon embraced her in the courtyard, relieved to have her back. She had grown a shade thinner from the journey, but her eyes shone at the sight of home. Home, for now, was King's Landing, though both she and Jon still thought of Winterfell as the place that had truly shaped them. That evening, they dined together in a smaller solar. Tyrion was present, as was Davos, Brienne, and a few others. Sansa recounted stories of the Vale, how Lord Royce, though frail, was in good spirits, how young Robert Arryn had grown more steady under various tutors, how the Vale's roads had been improved by volunteers from the Riverlands. Jon shared news of the Nathy visitors, the modest alliance they had struck, the continuing tensions with outlaws in the Westerlands and Dorne. It struck them as remarkable how each region had its own share of old ghosts or new malcontents. Peace was never a final state, only something that had to be cultivated and protected each day. Sansa listened with rapt attention, asking pointed questions. Is Dorne's rebellion limited to that one group? Or are we hearing rumors of broader unrest? Tyrion answered, from what we can tell, just the Scorpion's tail for now. Prince Corran keeps most of Dorne content by letting them handle their own affairs, abiding by the old ways. But some in Dorne always wanted total secession even if they never mustered the strength to try it outright. And the Iron Islands Roderick the Red, he's still quiet, she asked. Davos nodded. Yes, for now. Asha's men remain vigilant. She may ask us to send a formal envoy soon just so the Ironborn can't claim we're ignoring them. But it's not urgent yet. Jon chewed a piece of bread thoughtfully. We'll have to send someone eventually, if only to show good faith. But let's not spread ourselves too thin. Sansa agreed, and the conversation drifted to lighter topics. Tyrion joked about how the city's new sewage system still needed improvements unless one enjoyed the stench. Davos teased him, saying, better the smell of latrines than the smell of rotting corpses in war. A sober truth, though they laughed grimly. Sansa inquired about the orphans' quarter, which she had helped establish. Jon reported that more children had found homes and some older orphans had taken on apprenticeships. The night ended on that hopeful note, small but real signs that life pressed on. In the following weeks, the tension in Dorne subsided. The outlaws were cornered by House Ironwood and put down swiftly, though not without a few skirmishes. Ser Jaime Fossaway's force arrived too late to take part but helped with the aftermath. In the Westerlands, the Crown's detachment had moderate success flushing out brigands near Ashmark. The so-called Black Lion had yet to surface in any tangible way, though whispers persisted. And from the Iron Islands came a message from Asha stating that Roderick the Red had slunk back to a hidden island with only a handful of followers. Amid these flickers of unrest, the realm carried on. Harvests came in from the Reach, filling the granaries in King's Landing. New roads were built in the Crownlands and the Riverlands, the latter financed partly by the silver gift Jon had once given Edmure Tully's family. The City Watch recruited new members, ensuring order in the capital was maintained. Sansa busied herself with reorganizing the Treasury's approach to taxation, hoping to keep burdens fair. Tyrion crafted trade agreements with the free cities, ensuring no single city dominated the Westerosi markets. Davos managed the Navy's new expansions, especially the galleys patrolling alongside Dorne's coasts, sometimes venturing out to the Summer Sea. Between all the meetings, decrees, and day-to-day governance, Jon made time to walk the streets every so often, armed with only a light guard. People had grown used to seeing their king among them. He might speak with a blacksmith, a spice vendor, a traveling bard, or a messenger. He learned which corners of the city still suffered, which wards had found new prosperity, which families had begun to thrive after the war. That, more than any official report, told him how the realm fared. And though not all was perfect, some neighborhoods still struggled, crime occasionally flared. He sensed a growing resilience, as if the city had collectively decided that it would never again let itself be so easily plunged into horror. One evening, after hearing the final petitions of the day, Jon headed to the Godswood courtyard for a breath of fresh air. Fireflies danced near the sapling's trunk, winking in the twilight. He stood alone, the air cooling around him, gazing up at the sky where a few stars peeked through the drifting clouds. His mind roamed over 1,000 concerns. From Dorne to the Iron Islands, from the unborn threats that might lurk beyond the realm's borders, to the possibility that new alliances, like that with Nathy, might shape an era of prosperity he had never dreamed possible when he was just a steward at the wall. Sansa stepped into the courtyard, having guessed he might be there. She wore a cloak of deep green, lined with soft fur, and her hair was unbound, falling in waves over her shoulders. She came to his side, and for a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked upon the slender white trunk of the young weirwood, the moonlight turning its leaves a ghostly pale. At last, she said, I visited the orphan homes today. They're in better shape than ever. Some of the children recognized me. Others asked where you were. They call you the King Who Walks. Jon's expression flickered with surprise. The King Who Walks? I'm not sure that's a very regal title. She laughed softly. Maybe not, but it's how the small folk see you. Someone who doesn't hide in a keep, but moves among them. He let out a breath, watching it dissipate in the cooling air. I'm glad. If I ever become so distant they can't recognize me, I'll have lost what truly matters. Sansa's gaze turned upward, as if considering the swirling patterns of the sky. It's still strange sometimes, isn't it? To think we survived the long night, that we're here, talking about harvests and roads and treaties instead of bracing for the end of the world. Jon nodded. I have nightmares about it sometimes, but each day I see what we've rebuilt, and I remember why it was worth fighting. They talked for a while longer about the slow but steady transformations taking place across Westeros. The Vale's roads, the Iron Islands' cautious acceptance of a less violent future, the Westerlands struggling to redefine themselves without the old Lannister grandeur. The ghost of Daenerys drifted through Jon's thoughts sometimes, especially when the conversation touched upon freeing slaves or forging alliances with distant lands. He did not speak of her aloud, but Sansa understood. Her quiet look of empathy told him he was not alone in carrying that memory. Over the next few days, the realm's business carried on in its customary swirl of letters, counsel, and small mercies. Jon resolved a dispute between a northern merchant and a Pentoshi trader over shipping fees, mediated a quarrel among local goldsmiths, and signed off on expansions to the city's aqueduct system. Each issue was vital to those it affected, but none threatened the realm with immediate crisis. For once, things seemed calm. It was at the edge of that calm, in the twilight of an otherwise ordinary day, that a series of alarming ravens arrived. 3 messages from 3 different lords in the Westerlands. Each proclaimed that the so-called Black Lion had attacked an outpost near the Gold Road, burning storehouses and proclaiming a new order of Western independence. The letters warned that the raiders numbered in the dozens, armed and fanatical, possibly aided by scattered Lannister loyalists who resented the crown's leadership. The great house of Lannister had no single strong figure to unify them anymore. Tyrion was a Lannister, but many in the Westerlands saw him as a traitor for serving the Iron Throne. This Black Lion figure had seized on that resentment, and she was no mere rumor. She now had blood on her hands. Tyrion read the letters, his mouth tight. They've apparently crowned her the Lion Queen of the West. How very creative, he said, voice laced with bitterness. Our watchers think she's taken a portion of the old Lannister gold from hidden caches, paying mercenaries to fight. If so, she could pose a real threat. Jon rubbed his temples. We can't let this ignite into a rebellion. If the Westerlands falls into civil war, all the other tenuous alliances might start to fracture. We'll handle it swiftly. Sansa, who had just taken her seat, nodded gravely. We should send a force, large enough to put this rebellion down decisively, but not so large that we appear to be conquering the Westerlands. We must tread carefully. We can't punish the entire region for the actions of a few fanatics. Davos murmured agreement, scanning a map that lay spread on the council table. If we dispatch cavalry from the Crownlands, meet up with loyal Westerland lords at a strategic spot, we can box these rebels in before they spread too far. But we need good intelligence on where the Black Lion is operating. We only know she attacked an outpost on the Gold Road. Tyrion tapped a finger on the map near the Sarn Ford. I can guess a few places they might hole up. The hills near Cornfield, or the crags above Deep Denver. This all depends on how many men she truly commands, and whether she's paying off local peasants to join her banner. Jocelyn Rivers entered, having just received word from her spies. We have a name for the Black Lion. Lyessa Hill, rumored to be the bastard daughter of a lesser Lannister cousin. She's charismatic, and she hates what became of her house under Cersei's madness and Tyrion's shift in loyalty. She's claiming that the Iron Throne is weak and that the West should be sovereign, ruled by true lions of Casterly Rock. She's convinced a handful of petty lords to side with her. Hard to say how many men she'll muster, but the initial figure is at least 200 armed riders plus footmen from local villages. That's more than a band of brigands, Sansa said, tension lacing her voice. She could wreak havoc if left unchecked. Jon made up his mind. We'll send a royal host, but not an overwhelming army. I'll lead it myself. If we move quickly, we can corner her. We'll do our best to encourage her followers to surrender, most are likely just fooled by her rhetoric. But if she insists on violence, we'll answer in kind. The Westerlands is still part of this realm. Tyrion's eyes flickered. You riding into the Westerlands to face a self-proclaimed Lannister rebel. The irony is thick, your grace. Jon looked at him steadily. Would you rather lead the host? Tyrion's expression softened. No. I'm no battle commander, and you know that. But if you're going, I'd like to accompany you, not into the fight, mind you, but to speak with any lords who might be on the fence. Some might be swayed by an actual Lannister who stands with the crown. Jon agreed, seeing the logic. He turned to Sansa, who had gone pale at the idea of him marching off to quell a rebellion. You'll stay here, he said gently. Keep the city running. Ensure we don't lose stability while I'm gone. She nodded, though reluctantly. All right. Just be careful. If Lyessa Hill is cunning, she might lay traps. We'll take no unnecessary risks, Jon promised. But we have to act. We can't let the realm slip back into chaos. Within days, the Crown's forces assembled outside King's Landing, a contingent of 500 cavalry and 1,000 foot soldiers plus some archers. It was not a grand host, nothing like the massive armies mustered during the War for the Dawn, but enough to face a rebellion of a few hundred and to deter more from joining. Loyal Westerland bannermen had promised to gather additional men at a rendezvous near Stony September. Jon wrote letters to them, urging them to handle their peasants with care, do not punish entire villages for the actions of a handful. The last thing he wanted was a scorched earth approach that would breed resentment for generations. Before departing, Jon left instructions with Sansa and the council regarding the city's governance, the patrolling of the coasts, and possible responses to Iron Island developments. He told them to send ravens if any new crisis emerged. Sansa walked with him to the stables on the morning he was to leave. The sky was a crisp blue, the sun not yet hot, and the soldiers were lining up in orderly ranks. Banners of wolf and dragon flew alongside the more traditional crown banners. Tyrion stood nearby, adjusting his horse's bridle with a wry expression, not entirely comfortable with riding. Brienne of Tarth was coming as well, in part to command the King's Guard on the journey. Davos would remain in the capital for the moment, managing shipments and supporting Sansa. When all was ready, Jon turned to his sister. She placed a hand on his forearm. Don't let them draw you into a trap, she said softly. Don't let them make you the villain in their story. He inclined his head. We'll try to settle this with as little bloodshed as possible. Then, in a lower voice, if it escalates, it won't be by my choice. With that, he mounted his stallion, an iron-gray destrier gifted by a northern lord. The cavalry began to march, hooves beating on the dirt road that led westward. Tyrion, somewhat clumsy on horseback, followed alongside a pair of guards, determined to see this through in person despite his poor riding skills. Jon glanced back once, saw Sansa standing by the gates, her hair rippling in the wind, a solemn expression etched on her face. Then he faced forward, guiding the host that bore the realm's future in its ranks. The journey west took them along the Gold Road, passing farmlands that had grown fertile again. Villages peered out from behind low stone walls, some sporting new roofs or freshly repaired barns. Everywhere Jon went, the small folk paused in their labors to watch the passing soldiers. Some looked fearful, remembering that armies had once burned their fields or demanded tithes they could not pay. Jon tried to reassure them, stopping occasionally to explain that they marched not to pillage but to quell a rebellion that threatened the peace. A few villagers offered bread or fruit, a humble gesture that moved Jon more than any grand tribute could. At Stony September, the local lords who had pledged men to the crown were already waiting. Their forces were not large, 200 cavalry, another few hundred foot, but enough to bolster the royal host. Jon convened a war council in the local inn, which had been converted into a makeshift headquarters. The innkeeper, awed by the presence of so many highborn, served watered wine and stew. Maps were spread across rough wooden tables. Candlelight flickered over the faces of knights and bannermen who looked to Jon for guidance. A burly knight from House Swyft spoke first. Scouts say Lyessa Hill's band last raided near Cornfield, then vanished into the rolling foothills. She's rumored to have a base in the old mines north of there. Caverns once used to extract gold. They're labyrinthine, easy to hide in. Tyrion sniffed. Why am I not surprised? The gold mines have been idle for years, but they run deep, connecting in ways even I might not recall. She'll have ample cover. A knight of House Crakehall reported that villagers claimed to have seen a black lion sigil on at least 36 horsemen. They threatened to take Casterly Rock next, proclaiming it the seat of a rightful Lannister line. Jon studied the map. We'll approach from 2 directions, one force from the south, another from the east, to corner them. If the mines are their refuge, we'll try to block any exit. Then we'll give them a chance to surrender. The local lords can speak to them, remind them that House Lannister is not extinct. Tyrion is here, sworn to the crown. If that fails, we'll have to flush them out by force. They spent hours refining the plan. Tyrion suggested parley first. Perhaps he could speak to Lyessa Hill, though it was risky. Jon agreed to let Tyrion try if they could ensure a safe meeting site. The next morning, the combined forces set out, splitting into 2 columns as arranged. Jon led the larger group. Tyrion and a lesser proportion of soldiers took a route that would bring them around the foothills, aiming to block a potential western escape. Clouds gathered overhead that afternoon, threatening rain. The land grew more rugged, with rocky outcrops and small valleys thick with brush. Scouts rode ahead, returning with reports that they had found evidence of campfires and hoof tracks. Late in the day, Jon's column came upon a small hamlet that had been ransacked. Doors smashed, a few cottages burned, and terrified villagers huddling near the remains. They told Jon the Black Lion's men had come demanding supplies, gold, and loyalty. When refused, they set torches to the barn. No one had been killed, though one man was beaten badly. Jon's jaw tightened. This was precisely the sort of brutality he had hoped to prevent. He left a small detachment to help the villagers rebuild what they could, providing them with a portion of the army's rations, then pressed on. Overhead, a drizzle began. The men pulled cloaks over their mail, forging through muddy tracks. By dusk, they established a makeshift camp near a wooded ridge. Fires glowed in the gloom, tents rose in neat rows. Jon and his officers huddled in his command tent, planning their next move. One of the outriders had discovered a path leading into the OL. D mines, presumably a side entrance. They would investigate at first light. As Jon tried to rest, the patter of rain on canvas grew heavier. Memories stirred of another night, long ago when he had stood watch at Castle Black in a blizzard. Then he had known a far more dire threat marched upon them. Now, the enemy was men and women of his own realm, misguided or power-hungry. In some ways, that was more disheartening. He reminded himself that no realm was free of conflict, that perhaps the best they could do was respond swiftly and justly. At dawn, the rain had eased to a misty drizzle. Jon and a few scouts ventured toward the rocky slopes, discovering an entrance to the mines partly hidden by overgrown shrubs. The ground showed recent footprints, hoof marks, and discarded refuse. 2 watchers, ragged men with black lion patches on their cloaks, spotted Jon's approach and shouted alarm. Arrows whistled from the rocks, forcing Jon and his scouts to retreat behind boulders. One arrow glanced off Jon's mail, nearly finding its mark. He felt a surge of anger. These were his own subjects, drawing his blood. They regrouped, forming a shield wall. Archers responded with warning shots. The watchers scrambled back into the mine. Jon and his men did not give chase. They needed a more organized assault to avoid being funneled into unknown tunnels. Instead, Jon ordered a messenger to wave a white flag of parley and call for Lyessa Hill. At first, there was no answer from the dark maw of the mine. Then a single figure appeared, a woman of middling height, her golden-brown hair pulled back, wearing a battered breastplate adorned with a black lion painted across the chest. She carried no visible weapon, but Jon noted the dagger at her hip. Her voice rang out through the damp air. "Who commands these crowned soldiers?" Jon stepped forward, staying behind a line of his men. "I am Jon of House Stark and Targaryen, King of the 7 Kingdoms," he said, voice calm but carrying. "I'm here to end this bloodshed." "Who are you?" She spat on the ground. "Lyessa Hill, rightful heir to the west, by Lannister blood. I've rallied these folk to free themselves from your tyranny." Jon kept his tone level. "There's no tyranny here. The realm is united under a single crown that respects each region. The Westerlands have seats in my council. If you have grievances, we'll hear them. Lay down your arms and we can talk." Her laugh was a bitter bark. "Talk? With Tyrion Lannister, who sold out his own house? With a so-called king who was once a bastard in the north?" You know nothing of our suffering. Cersei might have been mad, but at least she kept the West strong. Since she fell, we've had no seat of power except scraps thrown by your precious throne. Now the mines are emptied, the gold's gone, and the small folk starve while you rebuild King's Landing. Jon frowned. If the mines are depleted, it's not by any act of mine. The crown supports trade and farmland in the Westerlands, the same as any other region. If you need relief. She sneered. We need our pride restored. We'll carve our own path. Leave, or we'll fight. Jon's eyes hardened. If you choose violence, you'll bring only more suffering to the people you claim to defend. This is your chance to surrender. If you do, I'll grant clemency to any who lay down arms now. You can state your grievances at a formal hearing. She glared at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she retreated into the mine. An arrow whistled out seconds later, burying itself in the ground near Jon's feet. The message was clear: negotiations would not come easily. Jon withdrew, returning to his main force. His outriders brought word that Tyrion's column was in position on the far side of the hills, ready to block any retreat. Jon decided to wait for Tyrion to approach for a final attempt at parley. By midday, Tyrion arrived with a small escort, mud splashed on his boots, his face grim. He listened to Jon's account, nodded, and said, "Let me try to speak with her. She's using House Lannister's legacy. Perhaps I can talk sense into her." Jon hesitated. "It's risky. She has archers hidden in those tunnels." Tyrion mustered a faint smirk. "I've faced worse odds. We'll approach under a white flag. If she kills me outright, that speaks volumes about her cause." They agreed to let Tyrion try, though Brienne insisted on being nearby with a small guard. On foot, Tyrion and Brienne's party neared the mine entrance, carrying a makeshift banner of truce. They called out for Lyessa Hill, announcing Tyrion Lannister's presence. For a tense span of heartbeats, there was only silence, broken by dripping water in the rocky terrain. Then Lyessa emerged again, flanked by a half-dozen armed followers in black lion tabards. She eyed Tyrion with open disdain. "So the imp himself comes to treat with us. Or should I say the hand of the king? How loyal you are after all your sister did to keep the West." Tyrion kept his composure. "My sister burned the realm, nearly starved its people, and in the end lost everything through cruelty and pride. If you revere that, you're reenacting the same tragedy. But you and I both know the West has bled enough." She barked a laugh. "Easy for you to say, living in the Red Keep. We scratch in the dirt for gold that's gone, watch our fields yield less each year. Yet the crown never once offered real aid, only taxes and forced unity. We want independence." Tyrion drew a steady breath. "A separate kingdom? With you as queen? Why not?" she challenged. "I have Lannister blood. That alone is more claim than that Targaryen bastard had to anything in the West." He recognized the deep well of resentment. "And if you succeed in seizing a corner of the Westerlands, what then? Or with the crown? Do you think the rest of Westeros will let you remain a breakaway kingdom? You'll doom your people to bloodshed, all for a desperate dream of restoring a name that, frankly, lost its luster long ago." Her eyes flashed. "The Lannister name may be tarnished, but it's ours. We don't bow to Starks or Targaryens. You should join us, dwarf, take your rightful place in the West." Tyrion shook his head, voice softer now. "I serve a king who cares about his people. I've seen him feed the hungry, walk among them without fear. I've seen him rebuild after the worst war in memory. The old ways are gone, clinging to them invites more ruin. If your people are suffering, declare your loyalty, come back into the fold, and demand representation. The king will listen. I'll see to it myself. But if you persist in this madness, you'll be crushed. And for what? A cave in the hills and a black lion banner?" She clenched her jaw. "You've betrayed your house. You speak with sweet words, but we want our freedom, not a seat on some council. We have funds enough from hidden Lannister gold, and mercenaries arrive by the day. Soon we'll march on Casterly Rock." Tyrion's gaze sharpened. "The rock is not defenseless, nor will you find the vaults there full. You'll only find heartbreak for your followers. I beg you, stop this." For a moment, Lyessa's facade wavered. Then anger flared in her eyes once more. "I suppose I should kill you where you stand, traitor. But perhaps I'll wait, let you watch as we take the West for ourselves." She spun on her heel, her men raising crossbows as a warning. Tyrion retreated with Brienne, heart pounding. No peace would be found today. Jon's army had no choice but to act. Returning to Jon, Tyrion recounted the exchange. Jon nodded, a grim line on his face. "Then we give them one final chance to yield when we lay siege to the mine entrances. If they resist, we push in carefully." The rest of that day was spent positioning archers on ridges, placing foot soldiers to guard possible exits, and preparing for a methodical approach to each known mine entrance. By nightfall, the camp bustled with tension. Torches glowed in the gloom, the wind carried the scent of damp earth, and the threat of combat hung heavy. Soon after midnight, the sound of distant horns broke the stillness. Scouts came running, breathless, to report that a band of the rebels had slipped out of a hidden tunnel, attacking the flank of one of Jon's outposts. The fighting was fierce in the dark, lit only by moonlight and the flicker of scattered torches. Jon, roused from restless sleep, led a rapid response with cavalry. Clashing steel rang across the rocks. He glimpsed men wearing black lion crests locked in combat with his soldiers. The rebels fought with reckless abandon, some screaming curses against the crown, others clearly driven by desperation. Swords sparked, arrows hissed, men fell on both sides. Jon parried a wild strike from a rebel wielding a long axe, disarmed him with a twist of Longclaw, and commanded him to yield. The man spat, cursed, and tried to grapple. One of Jon's guards struck him down with a sword. At last, the rebel band broke, half lying dead or wounded, the rest scrambling back into the tunnel. Jon ordered the tunnels sealed with rubble to trap them inside. Shouts of surrender echoed in the darkness, but few responded. By the time dawn approached, the fires had died and the smell of blood mingled with the morning chill. A few crowned soldiers lay among the fallen. Jon knelt by one, a young man with curly hair, eyes staring blankly at the sky. He had taken an arrow to the throat. The tragedy of it slammed into Jon, another needless death, all for a false dream of reviving a broken house. When the sun rose, the final assault began. Jon's men used simple siege tactics to block each known mine entrance, covering them with boards and rocks. Smoke was funneled into a few of the deeper shafts, forcing the rebels out or suffocating them if they refused to flee. At one entrance, a group of rebels charged forth in a desperate bid. They were cut down or captured. Brienne led an assault on another side tunnel, fighting with her usual honor, disarming foes rather than slaying when possible. Some surrendered, crying that they had been misled, that they wanted no part in a hopeless cause. Others fought to the death. Finally, near midday, Lyessa Hill herself emerged from a smoke-laden tunnel, coughing, flanked by a handful of loyalists. She wore the same breastplate with the black lion, though it was dented and smeared with soot. Her sword was drawn, hair tangled with dirt. Tyrion stood with Jon, a line of soldiers behind them. Lyessa glared, chest heaving. Jon raised a hand for silence. "It's over," he said, voice echoing off the rocky walls. "Your men are beaten. Surrender, and I'll grant you a chance at fair trial." She laughed, a broken sound. "A trial for what? Loving the West too much? The realm's grown weak, bending to a king who never had the name Lannister or Baratheon or any of the old lines. This realm was built on conquest and power. Your peace is a lie, one day it will shatter, and the West shall rise again." Jon's expression was resolute. "If you truly believe that, then you've learned nothing. Power doesn't have to come from fear. You chose violence, and this is the result. Lay down your sword." She spat at his feet. With a roar, she charged. Jon tensed, Longclaw in his grasp, prepared to meet her blow. Their swords met in a clash of steel. She was skilled, fueled by desperation and fury, her strikes swift and punishing. Jon blocked, parried, sidestepped. She aimed a slash at his face. He deflected, forcing her blade wide. She pivoted, tried to knock Longclaw from his grip. He twisted free, swiped low at her legs. She jumped back. For a moment, they circled, the ring of soldiers holding back from intervening for fear of striking their own king. Lyessa lunged again, a savage overhead blow. Jon met her halfway, crossing blades. He pressed downward with greater strength, driving her weapon aside. Her eyes widened with realization that she was outmatched. His next move sent her sword clattering from her grip. She staggered, fell to one knee, panting. Brienne and two soldiers closed in to seize her. She snarled, attempting to draw her dagger, but Brienne disarmed her, twisting her arm gently but firmly behind her back. Blood trickled from a shallow cut on Jon's forearm where her blade had grazed him, but he stood over her, breathing hard. "It didn't have to end this way," she glared, tears of rage in her eyes. "You might kill me, but others will remember the West's pride. You can't kill an idea." Jon's face betrayed sorrow. "No, I can't, but I can stop you from taking more lives for it." He gestured to the soldiers. "Bind her, treat any wounded, gather prisoners, show mercy to those who surrender." As they dragged Lyessa Hill away in chains, Tyrion followed with a pained expression. The Black Lion had been vanquished, but the cost lay in the wounded and the dead scattered across the rocks, in the smoldering remains of illusions that the West could rise under a banner of violence. Jon ordered medics to tend the prisoners and his own men alike. Dozens were captured, some battered and broken, others still defiant. The caverns revealed stashes of gold coins, likely part of a hidden Lannister hoard. That gold would be used to help the region rebuild, though ironically it had fueled the rebellion. Now it might serve a more worthy cause. In the aftermath, Jon summoned local lords and instructed them to show leniency where possible, granting clemency to minor followers of Lyessa who had been coerced or deceived. Lyessa herself, along with a handful of her top lieutenants, would be taken to King's Landing for judgment. Tyrion insisted on being present at her trial, hoping to glean more about who else might have funded her. For the time being, the rebellion was crushed, and the West would remain part of the realm. Yet Jon felt little triumph, only relief that the bloodshed was contained. As the combined forces broke camp and prepared to return east, Jon gazed upon the stony hills one last time. The wind carried a faint tang of ash and iron. Another threat subdued, another scar left on the land. He thought of all the other corners of Westeros, Dorne, the Iron Islands, the North, each with its own simmering potential for conflict. The realm might never be free of such troubles, but so long as he drew breath, he would answer them with what justice he could muster. The march back to King's Landing stretched over days. Along the way, some Westerland lords offered thanks, providing supplies to the returning army. Others kept their distance, wary of the crown's intervention. Jon tried to reassure them that he had no desire to punish the region, only to protect it. Tyrion spoke with families who had lost sons to Lyessa's cause, encouraging them to seek restitution. Some wept, cursing the false Lion Queen. Others looked to Tyrion with suspicion, never having forgiven the Lannisters' own history. When at last the spires of King's Landing rose into view, the soldiers felt a collective sense of homecoming. Sansa and Davos awaited them, along with a throng of watchers. News of the victory had preceded the army carried by swift riders. The city greeted Jon with cautious jubilation, another crisis averted, though overshadowed by the knowledge that men and women of Westeros had again fought one another. Sansa embraced Jon the moment he dismounted. She noted the bandage on his forearm with concern, quickly ushering him to a private corner where she demanded to know if he was truly well. He assured her it was a minor cut, that the real wounds were borne by those who had lost friends or kin in the fighting. She searched his face, saw the sorrow etched there, and pressed her lips together in empathy. Lyessa Hill and her key followers were placed in cells to await trial. Jon convened a session of the council the next day, with Tyrion giving a full report of the events. The gold found in the mines would be accounted for, much of it going to local reconstruction in the Westerlands, an act meant to quell any lingering resentment. Some argued that the crown should keep it all as punishment for rebellion, but Jon decided otherwise. Taking everything might only stoke new bitterness. As for Lyessa, she remained unrepentant, cursing the king, the crown, and Tyrion. A formal trial would follow, though no one doubted she'd be found guilty of treason and violence. The likely sentence was execution or life in the dungeons. Jon weighed the options heavily. He did not delight in capital punishment, but her crimes were grave. Her unwavering vow to continue raising men for war was a threat that could not be simply exiled. The council ultimately recommended the sword. In the end, Jon carried out the sentence himself on a gray morning in the courtyard, as was the custom of the North. His heart pounded as Lyessa Hill knelt, head bared on the execution block, still spitting defiance until the final moment. With Longclaw, he took her life in one clean stroke, recalling the old Stark words that the one who passes the sentence must swing the sword. As her head fell and the blood slicked the stones, silence gripped the assembled crowd. Jon felt no triumph. He looked at the sword in his hand, remembering the countless times he had shed blood for the realm, from the Wall to the Long Night, from the undead to the living who chose destruction over unity. The North's code demanded that if a man takes a life, he must look into the eyes of the condemned. He had done so, but it left a bitter taste. When it was over, Tyrion stood by him, looking shaken. "I never wanted it to come to this," he murmured. Jon nodded. "Nor I." In the days that followed, the city went back to its usual bustle. The trial and execution were widely discussed but did not cause unrest. The rebel prisoners were dealt with, some pardoned, others sentenced to labor, a few more prominent figures imprisoned. The gold shipments were arranged to support the Westerlands, along with a stern reminder that the crown would not abide future rebellions. A flicker of resentment lingered in certain corners of the West, but the immediate threat had passed. As Jon resumed his daily duties, the quiet nag of exhaustion weighed on him. He found himself in the Godwood courtyard more often, sometimes late at night, staring at the pale weirwood sapling. He would rest a hand on its trunk, feeling the faint pulse of life in the bark as though it were a distant relative of the ancient trees in the north. He wondered how many more times he would have to raise his sword against those he called his own people. He wondered if the realm would ever know a peace so complete that no one felt compelled to challenge it. Sansa joined him there one evening, the sky streaked with the last purple hues of twilight. He heard her footsteps on the cobblestone. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You carry too much, Jon." He exhaled. "Someone has to." She stepped around him, meeting his eyes, kindness in her gaze. "You don't have to do it alone. The council, me, your friends, we share this burden. And if some choose not to lay down their arms, that isn't your fault. You can only answer." He nodded slowly. "I know. And yet, each life I've taken, we were all meant to be on the same side after the long night. I thought we'd learned." "Most of us did," she said softly. "But there will always be those who seek power through conflict. That doesn't negate the good that's blossomed across the realm." They stood quietly, the night air cool against their faces. A few stars winked overhead. In the distance, a pair of household guards patrolled, their footsteps echoing. Faint laughter drifted from somewhere deeper in the keep, a reminder that life went on. Jon looked at Sansa, remembering the little girl who once dreamed of courtly romances, now a wise and steadfast woman. "We'll keep going," he said, more to himself than to her. "We'll make sure this peace lasts as long as we can." She slid her arm through his, and together they strolled back into the corridors, letting the hush of the evening settle around them like a balm. Outside, in the wide realm they governed, harvests continued, trade ships sailed, lords resolved or reignited feuds. The world was not perfect, but it was safer, more hopeful than it had been for a long time. And so the seasons turned again, each year bringing new challenges and new triumphs. Jon found a steady rhythm to his reign, guided by the principle that had defined him since he first took the Black at the Wall, the duty to protect. He guarded the realm against external threats, but also did his best to guard it from the seeds of internal discord, ensuring that no single region felt abandoned or oppressed. Though rebellion sometimes flickered, it never burned out of control. Though lords grumbled over taxes, most recognized the benefits of trade and stability. He learned that leadership was often about constant vigilance in the quiet times between storms. The realm's progress could be seen in little signs: newly rebuilt towns in the Riverlands, the Vale's improved roads, the North's flourishing croplands as winters grew less dire. The Ironborn under Asha had begun to foster trade and fishing industries that rivaled their old reaving days for profit. Dorne, though proud and distant, exchanged spices and wines with King's Landing regularly, their caravans traveling largely unmolested. Even the small folk in the capital felt fewer pangs of hunger, thanks to the flow of grain from the Reach and the restoration of farmland in the Crownlands. And the idea of one realm united under a king who walked among them no longer seemed so strange. Yet Jon carried the reminders of each threat faced, the scar of the Night King's blade in his memory, the ashes of King's Landing's old destruction, the mournful recollection of Daenerys, the tension of every challenge that tried to tear the realm apart from within. He no longer doubted whether he was meant to be king, it was the role he had chosen to accept for the sake of the living. With each passing year, the realm's children grew up with fewer scars, fewer nightmares of the undead or the dragon's wrath. Perhaps they would face different struggles, but at least for now they had a chance at life without the looming shadow of absolute horror. And if, in the darkest hour of night, Jon still woke from visions of ice-eyed wights or the roar of an angry dragon over scorched battlements, he found solace in the presence of Sansa's unwavering counsel, Tyrion's tireless wit, Davos's comforting pragmatism, Brienne's unbreakable honor, and the knowledge that he was not alone. The realm walked forward with him. He need only keep his sword ready, his eyes open, and his heart fixed on the vows he'd carried since he was young, to guard the realms of men, no matter how complicated those realms might be. And so the story continued, with each dawn offering the chance to build something lasting, each dusk reminding him of what had been lost. In that delicate balance lay the fate of Westeros, a fate that, under Jon Snow's steadfast hand, seemed poised to flourish beyond the nightmares of its past and into a future shaped, not by fear or cruelty, but by the quiet determination of a king who had never wanted a throne, but had taken it all the same for their sake. And so the story continued through the gentle arcs of changing seasons and the shifting landscape of a realm still recovering its long-lost stability. Jon Snow, king of the Seven Kingdoms by the will of the living, remained the quiet axis upon which the realm turned. Though many whispered about his Targaryen blood, more still knew him as a Stark at heart, a man who walked among them, measured justice with care, and wielded power only out of duty, never out of ambition. In the wake of putting down the Black Lion rebellion in the Westerlands, he carried fresh grief, the weight of each life cut short in yet another clash among men who should have been allies. Yet he pressed on, for there was always more to do, more pleas to hear, more corners of the realm demanding guidance. In the deep hush of winter's approach, the King's Landing nights grew cool, though not bitter. The true northern chill did not often venture so far south anymore, especially in these years of comparative mildness. Within the Red Keep, fires crackled in the great hearths, casting dancing shadows on walls hung with a mix of old tapestries and new banners. The seat of power never slept. Courtiers and officials scurried through corridors at all hours, scribes and stewards conferred by candlelight, and the constant traffic of petitions, orders, and letters poured in. Jon attended to it all with a patience that astonished some who remembered the brash young man he once was. He had learned, step by step, that forging a stable kingdom required an unglamorous, relentless labor of daily decisions and compromises. On a rainy afternoon, he sat with his small council in the refurbished council chamber. Thick glass windows showed the drizzle outside, droplets trailing down the panes in erratic patterns. A brazier glowed in one corner, easing the damp chill. Sansa was there, poised with her quill and parchment, noting each topic. Tyrion, as hand, had a pile of correspondence from lords both great and small. Ser Davos had just returned from a short voyage to oversee naval matters near Dragonstone. Brienne stood to one side, wearing her newly polished armor, having risen fully into her role as Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Jocelyn Rivers, the Master of Whisperers, sat quietly, a faint smudge of ink on her fingers from sorting through coded messages. Grand Maester Samwell Tarly, who had finally been approved by the Conclave and wore his chain with earnest dignity, joined as well, though he'd traveled a difficult path persuading the more conservative maesters that a Night's Watch brother-turned-lord might serve. And so the circle was complete. Tyrion cleared his throat, scanning the top parchment. First matter, a new wave of refugees has arrived at the Stormlands shores from Essos. They claim to have fled the aftermath of a failed rebellion in one of the free cities, Pentos, presumably. Gendry Baratheon has written that these refugees need shelter and food. He's done what he can, but the Stormlands aren't flush with excess. Jon listened carefully. How many people? Hard to say, Tyrion answered, pushing the parchment forward so Sansa and Sam could see. Somewhere between 300 and 400 scattered around the coast. Mostly families, a few sellswords, some artisans. They beg protection. They've no coin to speak of, but they're willing to work farmland or offer any skill they might have. Jon considered. We can't turn them away if they're fleeing violence. Let's see if we can distribute them among multiple regions, some in the Reach, some near King's Landing. If they have trades, we can settle them in towns that need craftsmen. Sam, can you ensure the relevant lords are informed? Maybe send a raven to Old Town to see if there's capacity there. Sam pushed his spectacles up his nose, nodding earnestly. Yes, Your Grace. Many southwestern towns still want more hands to rebuild old structures, especially near Old Town. The farmland around the Mandor is fertile. Sansa added a note. We'll have to guard against stoking local resentment. Sometimes small folk mistrust outsiders. But if we do it carefully with the right explanations, it can work. Davos folded his arms. Storm's End is recovering well under Gendry, but it's never wise to crowd too many refugees into one region. Spreading them out is best. I'll write to Gendry that we'll arrange broader placements. Jon was satisfied. A crisis averted before it truly became one. He had learned that swift, measured action often meant the difference between peaceful integration and unrest that might spark a riot. Next, Tyrion flipped to another missive. A matter from Dorne. Prince Corran has invited an envoy to Sunspear for a summer feast, though the actual date is near winter's onset, likely a gesture of goodwill. He's curious about these new trade expansions we've made with the free cities and whether Dorne can secure more favorable routes to the Summer Sea. He's also likely to bring up the matter of the patrol ships we promised to assist Nathy. He wonders if Dorne could position a small garrison on one of the stepstones to deter pirates. Jon's brow furrowed. A permanent garrison on the stepstones? That's historically a contested region. The Triarchy once warred over those islands. If Dorne places a garrison there, it might provoke other powers. But if it helps keep pirates at bay, it might be worth discussing. Shall we send a diplomatic party to Sunspear? Sansa inclined her head. It's wise to meet them on their own ground. Show respect for their autonomy. Perhaps we can finalize more stable routes for shipping. Dorne always wants assurance of self-rule, but so far they've honored the crown. A personal visit or at least a strong envoy would keep the bond. Jon thought briefly of going himself, but recalled his repeated journeys to quell rebellions. He couldn't be absent from the capital endlessly. We'll send Braavos and maybe Brienne. They're known and respected. They can handle negotiations and keep me informed. If Dorne truly wants a Stepstone's presence, we'll weigh the consequences carefully. Brienne shifted on her feet, her expression calm. I'll do whatever is needed, Your Grace. Braavos gave a small nod. I can sail us there. The route's fairly straightforward from King's Landing. We can take a royal galley or two, show we're serious but not threatening. Jon assented. Good. Organize the journey with Tyrion's help. Let's ensure the ships are provisioned. He paused, exhaling. If that's settled, what else do we have? Jocelyn Rivers glanced at her notes. Minor rumors from the north. Some free folk have begun pushing deeper into the gift, which they're allowed to do, but local lords grumble about losing potential farmland. Nothing urgent, but it might need a firm reminder that the free folk are under the crown's protection. Arya the Spear Wife is still their de facto leader. She's been fair in negotiation. A raven from Winterfell suggests we keep an eye on it. Sansa glanced at Jocelyn. The North is managing it well under Lady Stark, our aunt, technically. She'll handle local concerns, though it wouldn't hurt to reaffirm the crown's stance. And it's true, farmland is precious. We might encourage the free folk to focus on unclaimed parcels rather than pressing into areas already cleared by northern families. Compromise can be found. Jon nodded. Draft a letter from me to Arya and the local lords. We stand by the free folks' right to settle, but we ask them to respect established boundaries. I trust that Sansa, my sister, will keep it from flaring up. They proceeded through other topics, disputes over fishery rights in the Vale, shipments of grain from the Reach, a new wave of Myrish artisans seeking royal patronage. The meeting concluded with the sense that, while the realm had its share of friction, no single crisis threatened to undo the peace. That was, Jon supposed, all one could hope for in a land so vast and diverse. After the council, Jon retreated to the small courtyard Godwood. The weirwood sapling was taller now, its trunk thickening with each passing season, pale bark etched by faint grooves. A caretaker ensured it received enough water in the southern climate. Jon placed a hand on the bark, recalling the hush of Winterfell's ancient heart tree. Though this young sapling had yet to develop the carved face or the deep-rooted presence of its northern kin, it symbolized continuity, a piece of the old ways transplanted into a new era. Footsteps approached. He recognized them without looking. Sansa, her tread light but purposeful. She joined him under the budding branches, gazing at the slender trunk. It's grown since last year, she observed softly. He nodded. It has. Adapts to the southern air, I suppose. She studied him, crossing her arms. You look tired. He let out a breath, half a laugh. I am. Always. But better that than idle worry. At least we're making progress. Sansa glanced around, ensuring they were alone. I spoke with Sam earlier about some genealogical records. He's been compiling them, letters from the Citadel, old rosters from the Night's Watch. He says that if you ever wanted, we could update official histories to reflect your Targaryen parentage more prominently. But he won't do so without your consent. Jon's jaw tightened. It was a subject that never truly went away, though fewer people made fuss over it these days. I'm not sure I see the point. I'm king, but my claim has always rested on the realm's acceptance, on necessity rather than blood alone. Sansa inclined her head. I understand. But for future generations, it might matter how they record your line, your heirs, should you name one. The matter of heirs had loomed quietly for some time. Jon had never married. He had never shown much inclination to do so, haunted as he was by the ghosts of his past love and the brutal complexities of power. Some houses floated suggestions, daughters or nieces offered as potential queens, but he gently declined. The realm whispered about it behind fans and in tavern corners, the king who had no children, no official consort. What would become of the throne if tragedy claimed him? Jon met Sansa's gaze. If I die tomorrow, the realm has the council. You would guide them in choosing a successor. We've already established a custom that the crown must heed the wishes of the lords to avoid tyranny. I'm not worried. She let her hand fall on his arm. I know it's a difficult subject, but eventually we might have to decide if you name an heir, it could prevent a power struggle down the line. He forced a faint smile. When the time comes. For now, we have enough on our plates. Sansa accepted that, though her eyes carried a sadness he recognized. She, too, had endured heartbreak upon heartbreak. If he was reluctant to open his heart to a new family, she understood it all too well. The conversation drifted, and soon they parted ways. Sansa had a meeting with a group of city guilds while Jon had promised to visit the Orphan's Quarter. Another day of small steps. In the Orphan's Quarter, life bustled with energetic chaos. Children played in dirt alleys, chasing one another with homemade wooden swords. A pair of septas and a few secular teachers provided basic lessons in reading and sums, an initiative Sansa had championed with the city's blessing. The buildings were cramped but gradually improving, some replaced with sturdier wood frames and fresh roofs. As Jon walked among them, accompanied by 2 guards, the children's eyes lit up. They ran to greet him, calling him the king who walks, as Sansa had said they would. His presence was no longer a novelty but still a source of excitement. He asked them about their lessons, their chores, whether they had enough food. They answered eagerly, some showing off chalk writing on a scrap of slate, others brandishing rag dolls or little whittled animals. He spoke with the septas about any current needs, supplies, more blankets for winter, fresh firewood. He noted their requests mentally. When he left, he promised to send a few barrels of oats and dried beans from the Red Keep stores to help them through the colder weeks. Simple acts, but they meant the difference between hunger and sustenance for the youngest in the city. That evening, as he dined on roasted vegetables and a savory pie, he thought about those children, how they had never truly experienced the nightmares of the Great War or the cruelty of earlier conflicts. He felt a pang of longing that he himself had never known such peace in his youth, that none of the Stark children had. But it fueled him to continue ensuring the realm grew safer, kinder, a place where future generations need not cower in fear of White Walkers, tyrants, or endless bloodshed. In the days that followed, Braavos and Brienne departed for Dorne, sailing south on 2 sleek royal galleys. Jon saw them off at the harbor, the wind teasing the ship's sails as they caught the current. He trusted their negotiation skills and their sense of honor. If there was to be any conflict over the stepstones or shipping routes, they would find a middle ground with Prince Corran. Then he returned to the Red Keep, where fresh messages awaited. One scroll, sealed with the dire wolf of House Stark, caught his eye. He opened it to find a missive from Lady Stark, Catelyn's sister-in-law, once known as Barbary Dustin, though she had remarried into the Stark line after Lady Catelyn's passing. She had been caretaker of Winterfell's day-to-day affairs in Sansa's stead. The letter revealed that the Free Folk had sent Arya to Winterfell for renewed talks about farmland boundaries. The Northern Lords were restless, as fields near Long Lake had been left fallow for too long, and the Free Folk claimed them. Lady Stark wished for a decisive ruling from the crown to avoid potential skirmishes. Jon mulled over the letter, feeling a tug of nostalgia and worry for his old home. The North's vastness and its particular sense of independence made these matters delicate. After scribbling a reply urging patience and mutual respect, he asked Sansa if she might consider traveling north to resolve it in person. Sansa pondered it but decided to wait. The North was not yet at crisis point. Instead, they would rely on direct negotiations via Raven. If the tension rose, Sansa would ride north personally. Meanwhile, Jon continued to emphasize that the Free Folk had bled for the realm during the long night and deserved a place to call home. With time, the letters revealed a compromise. The Free Folk would keep the more remote forest tracts while the Northern Lords retained the prime farmland. An uneasy peace settled once again. Not all news was reassuring. From the Westerlands, reports trickled in about scattered outlaws still loyal to Lyessa Hill's memory. They painted black lions on walls or left threatening notes for local officials. None of it yet coalesced into a real threat, but it reminded Jon that resentments lingered. He wrote to the regional wardens asking them to maintain vigilance and to show mercy where possible. Whenever new seeds of rebellion sprouted, he wanted them uprooted by patience and reason, not by heavy-handed brutality that would breed more hatred. Amid these daily tasks, one letter arrived that caught Jon's attention in a different way. Its seal was unknown, some personal crest of an Essos merchant featuring a stylized gull. The content, an invitation to the city of Braavos, where a collective of wealthy traders and bankers sought an audience with the king of Westeros. They wished to discuss expanded shipping lanes and possibly the settlement of old debts. Tyrion read it first, brow furrowed. The Iron Bank had always been a formidable entity, and Braavos was a center of finance across the narrow sea. If these traders were coordinating with the Iron Bank, it could be significant. On the other hand, it might be a ploy to extract greater concessions. Jon debated whether he should go. On one hand, personally traveling to Braavos was a major step, signaling his willingness to engage the Essos powers more deeply. On the other, it could expose him to unknown risks. Tyrion pointed out that if Westeros truly aimed to expand trade and influence, forging friendly ties with Braavos was crucial. Davos was in Dorne, so a sea voyage might wait until his return. Alternatively, Jon could go with a lesser escort. But after reflection and a private talk with Sansa, he decided to remain in Westeros for now, sending Tyrion as his special envoy. Tyrion's cunning and familiarity with finance would serve well in negotiations. The letter was answered politely, the crown welcomed further ties, and the hand of the king would be dispatched when circumstances permitted. In the meantime, daily life in the capital pressed on. The city watch continued to grow more disciplined. Street crime was never fully eradicated, but pockets of lawlessness shrank compared to earlier decades. Construction on the new aqueduct progressed, bringing cleaner water to more districts. Enterprising merchants from the Arbor opened new taverns, while blacksmiths and artisans found patronage from lords visiting the court. Even the old block of charred ruins near the Dragon Pit was slowly redeveloped into a modest set of homes and shops, though the Dragon Pit itself remained a somber, half-destroyed shell on the hill. Jon sometimes looked at it from a distance, remembering the short-lived era of dragons under Daenerys and how swiftly dreams could turn to ashes. To lighten his spirit, he took to occasional rides beyond the city, accompanied by a small guard. One late autumn morning, he ventured south along the Rose Road for a few miles. The fields were dotted with the remnants of harvest, stalks of wheat and barley gleaned, hay bales gathered. The air had a crisp bite, but the sun shone warmly enough. Jon paused by a low stone bridge over a trickling stream, dismounting to let his horse drink. He gazed at the rolling countryside, listening to the wind rustle leftover leaves. A guard approached, clearing his throat. "Your Grace, is everything well?" Jon nodded. "Yes, just needed a moment." He thought back to the far north, to the raw sense of emptiness on the tundra, the crack of ice underfoot, the hush of pine forests. Sometimes he missed that quiet, even if it had been fraught with danger. He turned to mount again, patting his stallion's neck, and they continued on. Villagers they passed showed a mixture of surprise and delight, seeing the king riding with only a handful of attendants, looking more like a seasoned ranger than a distant monarch. When he returned by sundown, he heard that Braavos and Brienne had sent a raven from Dorne, bearing promising tidings. Prince Corran was amenable to stationing a small defensive outpost on an uninhabited island of the Stepstones. Provided the crown offered 1 or 2 ships to assist, this could deter slavers or pirates from coming up the coast to harass Nathy. So far, it seemed an amicable arrangement. Jon smiled grimly at the news, well aware that each success in forging alliances was a step towards safeguarding the realm, and that each step required constant vigilance to keep the peace. The following week, Sansa organized a royal audience for a group of petitioners from the Stormlands. They arrived in the Great Hall, which had been painstakingly restored since the days of war. Though the Iron Throne was gone, melted in that final spasm of destruction, an oak seat had been placed on a modest dais, carved with faint references to the dire wolf and the dragon. Jon found it more comfortable, less intimidating than the twisted swords of old. The old monarchy's pomp might have awed petitioners, but intimidation often bred fear or resentment, not trust. He sat on the oak seat, flanked by Sansa and Tyrion, while the petitioners were ushered in by a herald. There were fishermen seeking the king's arbitration over disputed waters with their neighbors. A blacksmith who claimed her new forging technique could produce better plowshares if only she had the resources. A minor knight complaining about a boundary shift that threatened the orchard he inherited. Jon listened to them all, asked questions, and offered reasoned solutions. Sansa advised him on matters of trade feasibility. Tyrion weighed in on legal precedents. The blacksmith was granted a small loan from the treasury on the condition she repay it through a portion of her future profits. The fishermen were told to mark their water boundaries clearly, with a city official to verify the agreement. The orchard dispute was more complicated. Jon decided on a compromise, dividing orchard profits proportionally, letting the knight keep a portion while the local bailiff maintained another. Not everyone walked away perfectly happy, but no one left in anger. These daily rulings might have seemed trivial in comparison to wars, dragons, or White Walkers, yet Jon found a strange fulfillment in them, ensuring that farmers and tradespeople could go about their lives without the shadow of conflict was, in many ways, the essence of what a ruler should do. He remembered how Eddard Stark had once spoken of the king as a caretaker, a shepherd protecting the flock. It wasn't always grand or glorious. It was about fairness, and fairness required listening. As the last petitioner left, a servant approached with a note for Sansa. She read it quickly, then beckoned Jon and Tyrion aside. "It's from Lady Brienne. sent ahead of the main raven from Davos, so it's brief. She says they're finalizing an accord with Prince Corran. They will return soon with a few Dornish dignitaries. She also hints that something unexpected arose. She doesn't specify what, but suggests it might be good news for King's Landing's future. Jon arched a brow. Good news from Dorne is always welcome, but cryptic. We'll know more when they arrive. Let's prepare to host Prince Corran's envoys properly. He asked that chambers be readied, ensuring they met Dornish customs for comfort and climate. The kitchens were to stock certain spices favored in the south. He recalled how in earlier times such tasks might have been left to a master of ceremonies, but these days many roles overlapped. The war had culled countless courtiers and some traditions had never fully revived. Perhaps that was for the best. 2 weeks later, on a mild afternoon, the Dornish party arrived at the city gates. Davos and Brienne led them in, flanked by a small group of Dornish guards. Clad in light, flowing garments suitable for a warmer land, the envoys surveyed King's Landing with composed curiosity. Their leader was a man named Lord Mharan Jourdain, middle-aged, with neatly trimmed black hair and a sun-scorched face. He brought a retinue that included a pair of advisors and a scribe. Jon and Sansa greeted them in the courtyard, exchanging polite bows. After the usual courtesies, they led the visitors inside, where cool flagstones contrasted with the outside warmth. Lord Mharan explained in the Solar that Prince Corran was satisfied with the arrangement for a shared outpost on one of the lesser stepstones. They wished to coordinate details, how large the outpost would be, who commanded it, how supplies would arrive, and how to handle any conflict with passing ships. Jon listened, occasionally glancing at Davos for confirmation. Davos nodded, confirming that the negotiations had gone well. The base would be small, perhaps 30 men from Dorne, 20 from the Crown, a watchtower or two, some coastal defenses. Enough to deter pirates without looking like an invasion force. While Tyrion and Sansa delved into the specifics with Lord Mharan, Jon asked Brienne quietly about her hint of unexpected news. She smiled faintly. It's likely best you hear it directly from Davos. Though I can say we had a surprising meeting in Planky Town. Jon's curiosity piqued, but he waited until after the initial session ended. That evening, as they dined privately, Davos recounted an incident on the return journey. In Planky Town, a local fisherman had approached them with a rumor. A small band of sellswords from Essos claimed to carry a message for the king of Westeros. They'd attempted to cross into Dorne but were turned back at the border. Intrigued, Davos had questioned them. Apparently, they claimed to hail from distant Meereen, one of the cities Daenerys Targaryen had once liberated, bearing evidence that a portion of the freedmen there wished to establish closer ties with Westeros. Some even rumored that a child of the Targaryen line might still exist in the east, though Davos suspected it was hearsay. The sellswords parted ways peacefully, leaving behind only the sense that Essos still remembered Daenerys' legacy and might look to Jon for a continuation of that dream. Jon rubbed his chin, processing the information. Thoughts of Daenerys always carried a sting. Could it be that her old domain in Slaver's Bay, now called the Bay of Dragons, still sought alliances? He'd never truly considered extending the crown's influence so far, but if a fraction of them believed in the Targaryen claim, they might see him as the nearest living relative of their old liberator. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. That's interesting, he said at last, voice low. But I'm not certain we can spare the ships or resources to forge alliances across the narrow sea and beyond. It's enough to keep peace here. Davos nodded. Agreed. But if they come seeking you, it might be wise to greet them with courtesy, not close the door. The Bay of Dragons has mostly stabilized under local councils, or so we hear, but the legacy of slavery remains in some corners. They might see you as a symbol, or they might just want the prestige of an alliance with the Iron Throne. Jon sipped his wine, feeling the old ache of memory. If they arrive at our shores, we'll speak with them, but we won't sail off to conquer or meddle. Our realm is enough to handle. That settled the matter for the moment. The next few weeks were spent finalizing the Stepstones arrangement with Lord Mharan and ensuring Dorne's broader interests were respected. Papers were signed, sealed, and witnessed in a modest ceremony in the Great Hall. Both sides appeared content. The Dornish envoys departed, leaving behind a sense of progress and mutual respect. Meanwhile, Tyrion prepared to embark for Braavos. He planned to take a single war galley with a small but competent crew. Sansa would remain at Jon's side in King's Landing, continuing to oversee daily governance. Before Tyrion left, he shared a quiet moment with Jon, walking through the Red Keep's courtyard at dusk. "I can't say I relish a boat ride across the narrow sea," he admitted, smoothing an embroidered vest. "But I've always wanted an excuse to return to Braavos under better circumstances than fleeing Lannister pursuers." Jon gave him a faint smile. "Travel safely. The Iron Bank will want assurances. Tell them we haven't forgotten our debts. They'll be repaid in due time." Tyrion paused, gazing at a swirl of lantern-lit moths near a torch. "Jon," he said, voice soft, "I've served many, some mad, some cruel. You've been different, like Ned Stark if he'd had a seat on the throne. If these Braavosi want to tangle us in financial webs, I'll do my best to keep them in check. Just remember, gold might buy us alliances, but trust is earned by more than coin." Jon placed a hand on Tyrion's shoulder. "I know. Do what you must and come back to us in one piece." Tyrion bowed theatrically, then departed to board his galley at the docks. As the ship slipped away into the twilight, Jon wondered what further entanglements might come from forging deeper ties with Braavos. He prayed it would bring more prosperity than trouble. In the days that followed, life in the capital took on its usual cadence. Sansa attended to a myriad of tasks, reorganizing the city watch's pay structure, receiving visiting lords from the Vale, and conferring with guild masters about a new trade fair. Jon oversaw training exercises for the royal garrison, ensuring they remained sharp in case of fresh rebellions. He continued his habit of walking the city streets unannounced, learning more from short conversations with blacksmiths, innkeepers, or traveling merchants than from many official reports. One such walk brought him near the old Dragon Pit ruins at twilight. The building stood mostly hollow, a crumbling dome of blackened stone open to the sky. Over time, the city's laborers had cleared much of the rubble, leaving a ragged shell that locals occasionally used as a meeting place for festivals or gatherings. On this evening, a small cluster of street performers practiced acrobatics inside the dome, flipping and tumbling on the cracked floor. They started when they saw the king approach with a single guard. Jon raised a hand, telling them to continue. Intrigued, he watched as two tumblers formed a human pyramid while another juggled torches. Their skill was modest but heartfelt. The faint echoes of laughter bounced off the dome's walls. When they finished, he offered a few coins of appreciation, ignoring their flustered bows. As he strolled away, he found himself imagining how different this place must have been when dragons roost within. Some days, it felt like that era belonged to a myth from thousands of years past. Around that same time, a fresh missive arrived from the north. Arya had returned to Winterfell after traveling further east than usual. Some said she had ventured to the edge of the lands beyond the wall to confirm the free folk had no new threats. In her letter, she described feeling restless. She had glimpsed rumors of strange ships far in the shivering sea, but nothing conclusive. She had also suggested that if the realm ever needed a roving scout or an unofficial emissary, she would be willing. Jon read her words with a mixture of fondness and concern. Arya's wanderlust had never faded. She moved through the world with lethal grace, forging her own path. He wrote back that she was free to roam as she pleased, though she was always welcome at King's Landing or Winterfell. The realm had grown big enough for them all, he hoped, if only they could hold it together. Time flowed onward, carrying both the trivialities and the gravities of ruling. Word arrived of Tyrion's safe landing in Braavos, followed by dispatches describing intricate negotiations with a consortium of bankers and merchants who eyed Westeros with equal parts greed and respect. Tyrion mentioned the potential for new loans or mutual investments, talk of establishing Westerosi counting houses in Braavos or a Braavosi trade enclave near King's Landing's port. Jon was wary of ceding too much, but recognized the potential boon for the economy. He wrote measured responses urging caution. Tyrion seemed in his element, bargaining daily with the city's famed moneylenders. Back in the capital, Sansa found a moment of respite one afternoon, suggesting to Jon that they visit the newly refurbished gardens behind the Red Keep. He agreed, setting aside scrolls for a time. The gardens had once been scorched, but under Sansa's guidance, new flower beds, hedges, and fruit trees had been planted. The crisp autumn sun bathed the greenery in gentle light. A few courtiers and off-duty guards lounged on benches, enjoying a break from the city's bustle. Jon walked with Sansa along a gravel path. The smell of roses and late-blooming lilies mingled with the tang of the sea breeze. Birds fluttered in the branches, chirping softly. They reached a small fountain, its water sparkling in the sun. Sansa trailed a hand across the fountain's ledge, her gaze distant. He regarded her quietly. You've done well here. The city was so grim once. Now it breathes again. She smiled, though there was a trace of melancholy in her eyes. We've all done our part. Sometimes I wonder if Mother or Father would recognize King's Landing now. Or if they'd see only the ghosts. Jon thought of Ned and Catelyn, how they had once traveled here for a short, fateful season. So much heartbreak had followed. They'd see the ghosts, he said gently, but they'd also see that we learned from them. She nodded, absorbing that. For a moment, neither spoke. The trickle of the fountain filled the silence. A pair of doves pecked at seeds near a hedgerow. Then Sansa turned to him, voice quieter. Jon, I know you find it difficult to think about a future beyond this endless cycle of governance. But you deserve happiness too. The realm, it might do well to see you with a partner. He sighed, meeting her gaze. You're not the first to say so. But I can't force something just for appearances. She laid a hand on his arm. Of course not. I only want you to know, if you ever find someone you can trust, you needn't shy away because of your duty. You can have both. He exhaled a small, rueful laugh. Perhaps. But not yet, Sansa. Not while there's so much that could unravel. She pressed her lips together as if wanting to argue but choosing not to. Instead, she squeezed his arm, and together they resumed walking, letting the gentle beauty of the garden overshadow heavier thoughts. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived, Gendry Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End. He rode into King's Landing with a small honor guard, dusty from travel, and asked for an immediate audience with the king. Jon welcomed him in the solar, where Gendry bowed out of respect, then quickly launched into an urgent matter. The refugees from Pentos had swelled in number. Where once it was a few hundred, now entire ships arrived at Weeping Town, carrying families fleeing turmoil in the free cities. Gendry was doing his best to house them, but he worried about disease spreading in crowded conditions, and local Stormlanders were growing restless at the influx. He needed the crown's direction. Jon frowned, eyes darkening with concern. Are we certain they're all from Pentos? Could this be a larger migration from various cities in Essos? Gendry shrugged. Some claim to be from Lys or Tyrosh. Others say Pentos. They talk of warlords, slavery creeping back in certain corners, or political strife. Hard to tell truth from rumor. But they arrive starving, battered, with nowhere else to go. Sansa listened closely. We can try dispersing them further inland. The Riverlands might take some, the Reach as well. But we need to ensure they don't simply flood one region. Gendry nodded wearily. Aye, we've tried. But word spreads among them that Storm's End is the easiest port to land in, so more ships keep coming. Jon considered the scope. We'll organize a proper response. I'll send inspectors to ensure they're not bringing disease, and if any criminals slip among them, we'll find out. But for the genuine refugees, we can't just turn them away. We fought too hard to unify this realm. We're not about to let desperation breed unrest. He assigned Sam to coordinate with local maesters for medical checks, Jocelyn Rivers to investigate any unsavory elements hiding among the refugees, and the city's quartermasters to arrange supplies. Gendry expressed relief. Thank you, Your Grace. I'd have handled it on my own if it wasn't so large. They keep saying more ships will come. I hope we're not in for a wave of thousands. Jon's gut twisted at the possibility. We'll do what we must, Gendry. In the following days, couriers and supply wagons traveled from King's Landing to the Stormlands. Refugee encampments were set up with better sanitation, though the process was far from seamless. Jon heard tales of tension. Some Stormlander villagers feared the newcomers, accusing them of taking resources. Others tried to help, moved by sympathy. The Crown's inspectors found that a few unscrupulous cells words mingled among the refugees, but mostly it was ordinary families fleeing rumored conflicts in Essos that no one in Westeros fully understood. Jocelyn Rivers quietly dispatched a few suspicious figures to the city dungeons for further questioning. She suspected at least one was a spy of uncertain allegiance. News of these refugees spread across the realm. Lords from the Reach, the Westerlands, and the Vale wrote to the king, demanding to know if this signaled a broader threat. Some worried an invasion lurked behind the refugees. Jon wrote back, assuring them they were simply displaced families, that the crown was monitoring the situation. Still, anxiety rippled beneath the surface. Even the small folk, so removed from Essos, whispered about a possible new war across the sea that might spill into Westeros. Amid these concerns, Tyrion returned from Braavos at last, stepping onto the docks with a fatigued expression. He arrived to find the capital abuzz with talk of foreign refugees. After a brief rest, he joined the council where he recounted his negotiations in detail. The Braavosi were willing to extend new lines of credit to the crown at favorable rates provided Westeros opened more ports to Braavosi counting houses. Tyrion also hinted that the Iron Bank wanted partial underwriting of these refugees, suspecting there might be profit in controlling how newcomers integrated. Jon's hackles rose at the idea of letting foreign bankers manipulate vulnerable people. Tyrion read his expression. I told them we'd consider it, but not to expect a free hand. I know you won't allow them to treat refugees as an investment. However, having Braavosi funds might help us feed and house them if we remain vigilant about terms. Jon's jaw set. I'll not have them turned into indentured servants. I'd sooner raise taxes across the realm than let the Iron Bank exploit desperation. Tyrion nodded sympathetically. I suspect we can strike a balance. The Braavosi are practical. If we show them they can earn interest without binding people in servitude, they might accept. Thus, negotiations on multiple fronts continued. A swirl of scrolls, meetings, and late-night discussions followed. The braziers in the council chamber glowed nearly round the clock. Sansa, Tyrion, and Sam hammered out a plan for distributing the refugees, ensuring each region took a share. Braavos, once back from Dorne, offered to travel again to the Stormlands to oversee the logistical side with Gendry. Meanwhile, Brienne and Jocelyn Rivers doubled security in King's Landing, wary of infiltration or sabotage. The City Watch stopped more foreigners than usual at the gates, politely but firmly checking for suspicious intentions. In the midst of this, a letter came from Storm's End that demanded immediate attention. The refugees reported that even more were en route, including a flotilla led by a mysterious figure known as the Chainbreaker, a former slave who had supposedly seized ships in Volantis. They intended to sail west until they found safety, and rumors said they were heading for Westeros. If so, this might be thousands more. The realm's resources would be severely tested. Jon looked around the council table, the tension thick. We can't ignore them, but if thousands arrive at once, we risk chaos. We may not have the capacity to feed so many. Nor can we let them starve. Suggestions? Braavos rubbed his knuckles. We could meet them at sea, guide them to certain ports. Spread them out among the kingdoms. But we must be clear that not everyone can simply remain in the Stormlands. Tyrion exhaled. We might send envoys to Essos, see if any local powers can be negotiated with to let these people stay closer to home. But that might be too late. Sansa's expression was solemn. Winter is mild now, but if another harsh season comes, how will we sustain so many? We need farmland, homes. Perhaps we open lands in the Crownlands or coordinate with the Riverlands. The realm is large, but it's not infinite. Jon realized this was a new kind of challenge, not a war, but an exodus. He thought of the free folk who once had nowhere to go but south of the wall. Then he had convinced Stannis to help, now he was the one in charge facing a parallel crisis. We'll do what we must, he said, voice firm. Braavos, gather a small fleet. You'll sail out to meet this chainbreaker if possible, find out their intentions. Offer them safe passage if they abide by our laws. We'll place them in quarantined camps if needed to ensure no disease spreads. Let's not meet them with hostility, but with order. Braavos nodded, though his eyes showed worry. Aye, your grace. I'll set out soon. Tyrion added, the Braavosi might see an opportunity here. They could help fund the settlement effort at a price. We must be cautious. Agreed, Jon said. We'll not sell these people into debt. But perhaps we can use some Braavosi investment for building new homes or farmland expansions so they become contributors to our realm rather than a burden. For the next fortnight, the capital braced for this potential influx. Braavos prepared ships, gathering provisions and medical supplies, while Sansa coordinated with lords across Westeros, urging them to take in a certain number of refugees each. Some lords complained bitterly, others complied out of loyalty or a sense of moral duty. The city's mood teetered between compassion for those fleeing horrors and anxiety about the strain on resources. Then word arrived. A large cluster of ships had been sighted approaching the eastern approach to the narrow sea, battered by storms. Braavos set sail with half a dozen crown vessels to intercept them near Massey's Hook. Days dragged on with no immediate news. Finally, a raven from Braavos reached the Red Keep. He had found the flotilla, over 20 ships, many barely seaworthy, carrying hundreds if not thousands of men, women, and children. They indeed followed a leader called the Chainbreaker, a tall woman with burn scars who claimed to have freed slaves from various cities. She had no desire to cause trouble but begged sanctuary. Braavos was guiding them toward calmer waters near the Crownlands. He estimated they would arrive in less than a week. Jon steeled himself for the challenge. He ordered the city watch to prepare sections of land outside the walls for temporary camps, pavilions, cook fires, latrines, all under guard. Maesters were called in from the countryside to assist with potential injuries or illness. The city's markets were told to expect additional demand. Sansa and Tyrion coordinated the distribution system to ensure no panic or shortage erupted. A certain dread crept through the capital as people recalled previous times large groups converged on King's Landing. Those had rarely ended well. But Jon insisted they meet this with compassion and structure, not violence. At last, the ragged flotilla appeared on the horizon, heralded by watchers atop the city walls. Ships of all shapes and sizes crept toward the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. From vantage points along the harbor, one could see tattered sails, patched hulls, a mix of colorful pennants or crude symbols. Some carried what looked like entire families huddled on deck. Davos's sleek galleys escorted them, flying the royal standard. Crowds gathered on the docks, uncertain whether to cheer or jeer. As the first ships moored, the chainbreaker disembarked, a gaunt woman with scars across her arms and neck, wearing a threadbare tunic, eyes reflecting a fierce determination. She bowed to Davos, then to the city watch, identifying herself as Salandra, once a slave soldier in Volantis. She had gathered her fellows, seized a harbor fort, and escaped across the sea. Jon, flanked by guards, approached to greet her personally. On the pier, the smell of brine and sweat mixed with the anxious hush of hundreds of onlookers. Salandra fell to one knee, though it seemed more an act of necessity than subservience. "Your Grace," she rasped, voice raw from shouting commands on the open sea. "We come seeking only a place to live free, to work, to survive. We've left war and chains behind." Jon helped her rise, ignoring the stares of the crowd. "You are welcome, so long as you abide by our laws. We'll provide for you, though we have limits. Follow our instructions to settle in an orderly fashion. We won't allow violence or raids." She nodded vigorously. "We have no wish to harm anyone. My people have known too much pain. Grant us a chance and we'll serve your realm." Over the next hours, a mass disembarkation took place. Family after family stepped onto Westerosi soil, children clinging to mothers, elderly men leaning on improvised canes, young fighters scanning the unfamiliar coastline with wary eyes. Some collapsed in relief, others wept silently. The city watch guided them to camps outside the walls, where hastily erected tents and cook fires awaited. Maesters moved among them, tending wounds and sickness. Food was distributed, a thin stew, bread, water, enough to sustain them temporarily. Salandra conferred with Davos and city officials, trying to keep her people calm. Fears of an immediate riot or a wave of theft proved unfounded. The refugees were too exhausted to cause trouble. They wanted rest, not conflict. Still, tension rippled. City dwellers worried about disease or competition for jobs. Some lords questioned how many more ships might arrive. Jon spent long days overseeing the process, ensuring minimal friction. He walked among the newcomers, speaking with them in broken common tongue or relying on interpreters. He heard stories of terror in Essos, petty warlords filling vacuums left by the fall of greater powers and scrupulous slavers capturing the vulnerable. Westeros to them seemed a beacon of stability. Jon felt pride mingled with sorrow, for his realm was far from perfect, yet it offered more hope than the chaos across the sea. As the weeks wore on, the initial crisis settled into a new normal. The newcomers began to disperse in groups to the regions that agreed to host them. Some joined small hamlets that needed laborers, others traveled to Storm's End or the Reach. Each group carried letters of safe conduct from the crown, detailing their right to settle, provided they abided by local laws. A fraction remained near King's Landing, forming a makeshift Essosi quarter beyond the older city walls. There, tents slowly turned into shanties and over time might become real homes if integrated peacefully. Salandra met with Jon regularly. She was illiterate but bright, and her leadership among the freed slaves was evident. She asked that they be given tasks, roads to build, fields to plow, anything so they could earn their keep rather than relying on charity. Jon arranged for some to help in the city's expansion projects. Others had specialized skills, smithing, weaving, that found a place in local workshops. There was friction, and scrupulous merchants tried to cheat them. Some city dwellers spat insults, but overall, the crown's firm stance on acceptance prevented widespread unrest. Tyrion, returning to the capital from a short trip to the Vale, observed the new arrivals with fascination. "We might be witnessing the start of a real cultural shift," he remarked to Jon one morning on the palace steps. "Westeros has seldom welcomed waves of foreigners. If we handle this with an even hand, it could make us stronger." Jon nodded, scanning the throngs of activity beyond the gate. "Or it could fracture our unity if we fail. But we must try." These people did nothing but flee chains and war. Tyrion's face was sober. A cause we both once followed, breaking chains, ending tyranny. Perhaps this is the next step. Amid all this, the realm's internal dynamics continued. Letters from the north spoke of mild tension but no crisis. The Riverlands found a bumper crop of grains, improving the supply situation. The Westerlands still had pockets of Black Lion sympathizers, but no organized rebellion had reemerged. Dorne prepared to send its small contingent to the Stepstones. The Iron Islands under Asha reported that Roderick the Red had once again tried to stir trouble but was quickly suppressed. In a sense, these issues felt almost ordinary now, manageable as long as Jon and his council remained vigilant. On a brisk evening, Jon found himself alone in the throne room, the great hall that still bore the scars of its past. The dais upon which the Iron Throne had once loomed was now occupied by the simpler oak seat. Torches flickered along the walls, illuminating the emptiness. He walked slowly across the floor, the echoes of his footsteps trailing behind. He remembered how Daenerys had once stood here, her dream of a better world twisted by tragedy. He remembered the nightmares of the war, the screams of burning souls. That history would never vanish completely. He climbed the dais and rested a hand on the oak seat, gazing into the shadows where battered pillars rose. Quiet thoughts drifted through his mind, the wave of refugees, the children in the orphans' quarter, the free folk in the gift, the new outpost in the Stepstones, the swirling dance of trade with Braavos. Above all, the precarious miracle that Westeros, once so fractured and ravaged, had not fallen back into endless war. They were holding, day by day. And in that holding, they were building something new, a realm that might outlast him. He recalled the vow he had spoken when he joined the Night's Watch, back when he was only a boy wanting to escape Winterfell's shadows. I shall live and die at my post. The specifics had changed, but the essence remained. He was still guarding the realms of men, only now with a crown instead of a black cloak. A gentle footstep caught his attention. He turned to see Sansa approaching from the shadows, wearing a cloak of pale green. Her expression was soft. I thought I might find you here, she said, her voice an echo in the hall. He smiled faintly. Just reflecting. She joined him near the seat, looking up at the wide arches overhead. It's been quite a journey. It has, he murmured. And it's far from over. She studied him. Do you ever wish you could just leave? Pass the crown to someone else, ride north, or sail west, and live quietly? He inhaled deeply, thinking of how he had once yearned for a quiet life, free of destiny's burdens. Sometimes, but not as much as I used to. The realm needs us, Sansa. I can't abandon them. She placed her hand on his on the armrest of the seat. You won't abandon them, but you also mustn't abandon yourself. Find moments of peace where you can. Her words, gentle yet firm, reminded him of the warmth they had shared as children, stumbling through a world too cruel for them. He squeezed her hand. I will. I promise. They stood there together, two survivors of a past that might have broken them, but instead forged a bond too strong to be shaken by time or trials. The torches crackled softly, and beyond the tall windows, the city's lights glimmered against the night sky. For a moment, all the chatter and clamor of King's Landing vanished, and it was just them, two siblings who had endured heartbreak upon heartbreak, finding purpose in the fragile peace they had forged. The next day, Jon returned to the swirl of responsibilities with renewed resolve. Reports from the Essos quarter showed a slow integration. Some newcomers found local work, while others still lingered in uncertainty. The City Watch kept careful order. Davos worked with Gendry to manage further arrivals, though the influx had slowed since the Chainbreaker's flotilla. Tyrion handled the delicate matter of Braavosi credit, ensuring the crown did not yield sovereignty. Sansa continued overseeing both city governance and letters from the north, the Vale, and the Riverlands. Brienne and Jocelyn Rivers maintained security, preventing radical elements from stirring up violence. Every day, Jon saw how each council member's efforts wove into a tapestry that held the realm together. As weeks turned into months, the realm settled once again. Autumn gradually gave way to a mild winter. Snow dusted the northern roads, but rarely reached King's Landing. The fields around the capital turned brown, the orchard leaves falling away. The orphans huddled in thicker cloaks, though the city's storerooms had enough supplies to keep them warm. Traders from the Reach still brought wagon loads of grain, while Riverrun surpluses helped feed the Essos newcomers. Even the Iron Islands sent salted fish and lamp oil, a testament to the uneasy alliance that had replaced centuries of reaving. Jon found moments to breathe amid the steady hum of governance. Sometimes he ventured to the gods with sapling under moonlight, letting the silent witness of that pale trunk absorb his thoughts. Other times he sparred in the training yard, remembering the discipline of Castle Black, feeling the sweat and burn of muscles that never forgot how to wield a sword. Ser Davos often joined him after returning from missions, the two talking about old times under Stannis, or the wonders of how far they had come. Sansa teased them gently about old war stories, though she listened with interest. Tyrion occasionally jested that at least no dragons threatened to melt the Red Keep again. And yet a subtle tension underlay it all, a sense that this peace stood on precarious pillars. The realm's combined experiences, slavery in Essos, the Night King's War, the Targaryen conflict, had shaped a generation. Many welcomed the calmer era, hoping to raise families, grow crops, and sleep without fear. But Jon knew that the seeds of conflict were never truly gone. If not guided, they might sprout anew. He accepted it as part of his burden. To remain vigilant, to steer the realm gently away from old hatreds, to meet each new threat with measured resolve. Near midwinter, a modest festival was held in King's Landing to mark the turning of the season. Merriment filled the streets, jugglers, fire-eaters, musicians. Citizens and newcomers alike thronged the squares. Jon made a brief appearance alongside Sansa, strolling through the crowd, sampling spiced cider from a vendor's cart, watching children chase each other in a spirited game of blind man's bluff. A small group of Essos refugees had set up a stall selling sweet pastries reminiscent of their homeland's cuisine, and local folk lined up, curious and adventurous. It was a symbol of how change could foster unity if nurtured kindly. Late that evening, Sansa commented that it felt almost like a dream, King's Landing hosting a cheerful festival without the overshadowing threat of war. Jon agreed, recalling how once the city had cowered under the tyranny of Joffrey, the madness of Cersei, the terror of the undead, and the final devastation of Dragonfire. Now it glowed with lanterns and laughter. Each step forward had been paid for in blood, but that blood had not been shed in vain if this was the result. And so the story went on, season by season, with new faces arriving, old grudges fading or sometimes flaring, and the king who had once been a bastard forging a legacy that blended Stark honor with Targaryen resilience. The name Jon Snow had become both a legend and a living presence, whispered in the north for his unwavering fairness, praised in the south for his personal bravery, and respected across the sea by those who recognized a realm that had withstood the greatest storm in living memory. In him, the realm saw a monarch who knelt to no illusions of grandeur, who governed not by might but by duty. He was no conqueror, he was a watcher on the walls of a fragile peace. The great houses adapted to this new era. The Vale thrived under the near-regency of Sansa's allies, the Arryn bloodline continuing under careful guardianship. The North, under Lady Stark's stewardship, balanced free folk, claims with age-old customs. The Riverlands recovered farmland and roads, their people once battered by every passing army, now eager for stability. The Westerlands, though still haunted by the downfall of House Lannister, rallied behind loyal bannermen who worked closely with Tyrion. The Reach, abundant as ever, quietly powered much of the realm's recovery with grain and trade. The Stormlands, under Gendry, saw new opportunities in shipbuilding and commerce, forging closer ties with King's Landing. Dorne trod its own path, proud yet cooperative, manning the Stepstone's outpost to guard Nathy's people. The Iron Islands, led by Asha's cautious hand, gradually learned to earn coin without terrorizing their neighbors. In King's Landing itself, the melting pot of diverse origins swelled. The Essos quarter gradually took shape, small houses replaced tents, basic crafts blossomed, and children of mixed heritage played in the alleys. Maesters taught literacy to those willing to learn common tongue. City guilds employed skilled laborers from across the sea, forging new crafts and cultural exchanges. Conflict still arose, an occasional riot over wages, a xenophobic slur, a petty crime. But each time, the crown stepped in with fairness, aided by local leaders who recognized that a thriving city required everyone's cooperation. Jon sometimes wondered if he would ever see a day when his sword, Longclaw, became unnecessary. He doubted it. Peace was not the absence of conflict, but the skillful management of it. Even so, each passing year chipped away at the old cycle of endless war, replaced by a cautious hope. If the realm could remain united, it might endure even beyond his reign, forging a legacy that outlived the storms of the past. And so he carried on, day after day, season after season, in the Red Keep's corridors and the city streets, in letters that spanned from Dorne to the Wall, in negotiations with Braavosi bankers and counsel with the smallfolk. The king who had never asked for a crown had become the unwavering steward of its burdens. He bore them not for glory but for the sake of those who followed him, for the children who laughed in the safe streets, and for the memory of all who had died to keep the realm breathing. Every once in a while, alone in the Godswood's moonlit hush, he would close his eyes and remember the crisp air of the far north, the swirling snow, the distant howls of wind across the wall. He would think of the vow he'd made long ago that he was the watcher on the walls, the shield guarding the realms of men. That vow had taken him farther than any boy from Winterfell could have imagined, across death and resurrection, heartbreak and triumph, battles against monsters and battles against men. And still he watched, still he guarded, and still the realm lived. Perhaps that was the greatest victory of all, that the living went on, that families grew, that hope found roots in soil once stained by blood. And though none knew what future storms might come, what fresh dangers might appear on the horizon, the king who had once been Jon Snow stood ready, determined that Westeros would never again bow to the darkness as long as he held the crown and the sword for their sake. Thus the realm persisted in a slow, steady sunrise that followed the darkest night, forging a story of renewal, built upon ashes, anchored by the quiet resolve of a man who had united them not by birthright alone, but by the indomitable bond of shared survival and enduring faith in the power of honor and mercy.